Hello and welcome to the regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council on Wednesday, May 6th, 2020. It's now 6:31 p.m. We are doing this by teleconference only, as all of you know. We remain within the shelter-in-place orders from the Marin County Department of Health and Human Services and the state of California. So we are all working remotely, and we have city staff online, and you have an opportunity to participate also. So welcome. Can we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Candell.
Here.
Councilmember Hilmer.
Here.
Councilmember Paulson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Haroff.
Here.
Mayor Way.
Here. And before we go any further, I just want to remind people from the community who might be listening or watching, or that you can log on to the city's website, and there's information there on how to make a public comment. There's 4 different mechanisms for making a public comment. You can send either an email or you can address us through this web portal that we're working on now. So our second item of business is public comment. And since this is an unusual time for us, we are allowing, or have the discretion to allow a little bit extra time, maybe in a few more minutes, in case people miss that comment time. We have had one comment submitted in writing this afternoon, and it's available on our website under the public comment section for everyone to read, and all the council members have received it. It's from Joan Domkowski, who lives in the Marin Park area. So do we have anyone in the audience who would like to make a public comment, Allison?
At this time, we have one person, so I will unmute you, call your name, and then you will unmute yourself and speak. Julius Terry Berkmeyer, it's your turn for public comment.
And before we do that, Allison, can we just, I forgot to mention that public comment is limited to 3 minutes for items that are not on the agenda. And remember that since it's not an item that's been on the agenda, the City Council really cannot comment on it. Go ahead.
Sorry, I lost the sound connection there for a little while. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Terry Berkmeyer. I've been a resident together with my wife, Laurie Lerner, in Larkspur since 1994. And my question pertains to the Larkspur Library. And
oh, I lost. I think we're losing his audio, Allison. I can't hear anything.
Yes, would you mind repeating your comment, Terry?
Is it a bad connection?
Yes.
Submit the question in writing, and that will solve the audio problem.
I would appreciate that,
okay.
Terry.
Thank you.
You're welcome to type it in tonight if you want to email to the city clerk at cityoflarkspur.org, or you can email comment@cityoflarkspur.org during the meeting, and we'll be able to receive it tonight if you want to do that. Okay.
Okay, I'll send it to the comments at City of Larkspur address. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll just look for any additional. Okay, we have one additional raised hand. Jean Friedel, it's your turn to make public comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to, Jean Friedel, 358 Larkspur Plaza Drive. I am speaking to you in reference to my position as a Park and Rec Commissioner. And I know that in the next couple of months, the council will address the budget issues and deal with the COVID-19 issues that you're all going to have to face in dealing with the upcoming budget. And I wanted to urge you to reach out to the organizations that support the city. The Commons Foundation supports rec and the library, obviously the Larkspur Foundation. I started a nonprofit a couple of years ago called the Wrecking Crew that supports the Recreation Department, and to see which ways we might be able to help meet the shortcomings that might start showing itself as we go through what we're going to face in the budget crisis. So I just wanted to urge you guys to do that. And I know the Wrecking Crew, I know the Commons Foundation, and I know the Larkspur Community Foundation would all willingly want to work with you and see how we could help address any shortcomings that are going to happen. So I just wanted to urge you guys as you go through the process to maybe ask us how we could help.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
At this time, there are no further raised hands, and the email we are expecting hasn't come in yet, so perhaps we could revisit it a little bit later on.
Okay, terrific. All right, thank you. So we're moving on to number 3, which is presentations and proclamations. This is 3.1 Measure B Pavement Repair Program Spring 2020 Update. Who will be updating us?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council, members of the public. This is Julian Skinner, Public Works Director for the City of Larkspur. Going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation here. Okay. Allison, is that showing up okay?
Yes.
Okay. So twice a year, spring and fall, we are coming to the council to give an update on our 5-year Measure B paving program. So this is the spring 2020 update. Just give a little brief overview here of some of the projects we've completed and some that are still in progress, as well as some of the projects that are coming down the line. This is our overview matrix for the Measure B program. The first column is the names of the projects we developed for the 5-year plan. Then we have a summary of the estimated costs that were developed at the time of the plan in the second column, and then the third, fourth, and fifth and sixth columns here are the years, the proposed years of the plan. So the first dated column here is 2019. Those are the projects that started last summer. And there's a red arrow here that's an update on those projects. That was Project 1, which was our first repaving project, and then the ADA ramps project, which is still under construction. The 2020 projects, there's an agenda item on your consent calendar tonight to award the 2 items that have green arrows here. That's this year's paving project. And then the third item down is a project we were planning to do this year, but it's been deferred a year out due to some storm drain improvements that are needed in that neighborhood. Then we move on into 2021 and 2022 columns. We're starting now to do the design work for those 2021 projects. So within a month or so, we will have touched all of the projects in this matrix other than the Project 4, which is scheduled for 2022 repaving. So an overview of Project Group 1, which was last year's paving project. It shows the Measure B cost estimate that was developed at the time of the plan, roughly $4.1 million. We completed that project at a cost of roughly $3.1 million. We did, however, defer some streets from that project. So we're keeping track of how our costs are going versus what we had in the plan, and considering what we paid to pave the streets and the value of the streets that were deferred, we're tracking ahead of budget by about $133,000 after completion of the Group 1 project. There's a list of the deferred streets at the bottom. Via La Paz and Parkside Way, unfortunately, were both deferred from last summer because the condition of those streets had deteriorated to the point where they needed a more intense treatment. So they have been, were bumped from last year's project. They're included in this year's paving project. Hawthorne was deferred because some concrete work was identified that needed to take place before the paving. So it'll also be included in this summer's project. And then Coeur d'Alejo is still on hold pending a storm drain improvement project that we need to complete on that street before we pave it. So bumping ahead to this year's project, Group 2, another 5 miles of street paving that we're proposing. Mostly overlays, which is a thin layer of asphalt on the top and some shallow repairs. But as you see in the photo here, this is Via La Cumbre, one of our streets that's in what's considered poor condition. And so this street needs to be reconstructed. And that's what was contemplated when developing the Measure B plan. But what we're looking at doing is doing a full depth reclamation on this street, which basically involves grinding the street down about a foot and then recycling all of that material, putting some additives into it, and then putting it back down on the same street. So it's has a cost savings associated with it because we don't have to haul out all that material and bring in a foot of new asphalt. We're able to recycle it in place, and it also is better for the environment. We reduce all of the trucking of hauling material off and bringing new material in. So we're anticipating, pending council's award of a contract tonight, that paving on this year's streets would start June 1st, so about a month out. And then construction is anticipated to continue through to early October of this year. Here's the Measure B map, color-coded by year. And so the Group 2 project, the Summers project, is the blue streets in a couple of different areas of town over at Via Casitas off of Bon Air, some of the Hillview neighborhood, and then the area that's kind of north and west of downtown, as well as a couple streets down in the south. And then also the red streets, which is primarily Via La Cumbre over by Sir Francis Drake and 101. And then I'm going to blow up here. We do have some streets that have to be deferred this year. So this is mainly in the Hillview neighborhood. We have a storm drain project planned for there. That's the storm drain pipes are not ready to go in yet. So we obviously want to put the storm drain pipes in before we pave the streets. So those streets are being deferred to next year. So last week we did open bids for the Group 2 project. We received 6 bids. As I mentioned earlier, there is an item on your consent agenda tonight to award a contract to Gelati Brothers, who are the low bidder of the 6 that we received. 6 is the most bids we've received for a project since I've been here. So there's definitely some good competition, and we got some good pricing. Evidenced by the low bidder was 15% below the engineer's estimate. And so similar look at the cost tracking for project 2, the same as we did for project 1. These are not real dollars yet because we haven't paved the street, but based on the low bid that was received, about $5.5 million was anticipated in the Measure B plan. Based on our low bid, plus some concrete work we have to do and a couple of small retaining walls to hold up the streets that are in this year's paving project, we anticipate spending about $3.9 million on this year's project. There's a couple of other streets that are going to be deferred out, plus that 3.9 actually includes the streets that were deferred from last year's project. So actually the bid as it looks now versus what was in the Measure B plan is about $1.5 million savings. So so far the numbers look good for this project. Part of that is due to the fact that we're doing that full depth reclamation on Via La Cumbre, and we're able to realize some cost savings there versus bringing in a lot of asphalt, which is what was anticipated when we did the Measure B cost estimates. Down at the bottom is a list of the streets that are being deferred from this year. So those are in the Hillview neighborhood, Cornell, portions of Harvard, and Tulane. Should also mention that there was another group of streets that were to be paved this year that have been bumped out a year. That's over Industrial, Rich, and Redwood. That have been pushed out another year, but none of those numbers show up in the above. The other Measure B project that's underway is the ADA curb ramps. So this photo is of a new curb ramp that's being installed. These are required by federal law at all places where sidewalks meet streets. So typically at crosswalks, I've got about 150 of them. Gelati Brothers were the low bidder on this project. We're about 90 ramps through the 150 that need to be done. And we're hoping this project will wrap up in August or so of this year. This project, unlike the paving projects, unfortunately has been running over what the Measure B estimates were. Part of that is because when we pave streets, there's a finite area of the street that we pave in between the curbs. So it's generally easier to estimate the amount of work that's going to be involved. The curb ramps are a little trickier. They're all a little bit different, and some of them require more concrete to meet existing sidewalk conditions. So we're having a bit of a cost overrun on that project. As it was awarded, it was over the estimate, and we're looking at with some additional concrete work there that This one's going to be close to about $500,000 over what was in the Measure B report by the time we get finished. So fortunately, we're looking at about a 1.5 million cost savings on the paving, and we're probably going to lose about $500,000 of that savings with the ADA ramp project. Bumping ahead to next year, so I mentioned as soon as we start paving 1 year street, we're already working on the design for next year's. So this is a kind of a look ahead at what we will be paving next summer. So these are the purple and yellow streets on this map. Plus we'll add in the streets that are being deferred this year in Hillview. And also the light blue streets here are the industrial and rich streets that I mentioned got bumped from an earlier project also on the schedule for next year is East Sir Francis Drake paving. We've separated this out in a separate contract from all the other streets, mainly because it more than likely will require night work. And it's just a different nature of a project with the amount of traffic that's on that street. So it's kind of a standalone project. And we're actually working with the county of Marin now. As you know, they have a project to repave Sir Francis Drake within the county. And there's a bit of overlap where the two projects meet. And so it may make sense to have the county actually pave a portion of Sir Francis Drake west of 101 before we get to our project. This is an overview of the schedule, shows where we are right now. With the award of the contract tonight, we'll be in construction for the phase 2 project, and then also under construction are the ADA ramps. And as I mentioned, we're well underway with the design for Sir Francis Drake. This one had a bit more lead time because it requires coordination with Caltrans because we have to pave all the way under the freeway through those ramps. And then the Group 3 paving design is shortly going to get underway here. So that's an overview of the Measure B program and where we are and what we're looking forward to. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Julian. We'll begin if the council has any questions.
Madam Mayor, I have a question. And I'm not sure, Dan, if this is for you or for Julian, but I just want to confirm that these projects, which because they're Measure B projects, are not going to affect our budget one way or another. So there's no cost savings to us to defer these projects. That won't help us at all with our budgets coming up. If you could just confirm that, that would be great.
So these projects are all funded in the capital improvement program with the proceeds from the bond sale that's being repaid with Measure B sales tax. So I think Dan can speak a little more to the health of that fund and the repayments as it is now, but there's no general fund per se other than the bond proceeds that's going into these projects.
Did that help, Scott, or do you need?
It did. I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page and it makes sense to go forward with these now. Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yes, Gabe. Did you have something?
Julian, I'm wondering if the COVID-19 reduction in traffic had any impact on the design, of say the Sir Francis Drake timing or how that might proceed, because I imagine the heavier traffic patterns at other times of the year might affect when you want to get started on that.
Yeah, so I think if we were doing Sir Francis Drake this year, it's currently under design now, but it's not scheduled to go into construction until next year, or at least the city's portion of it. I think if Sir Francis Drake were scheduled to be paved right now, we'd definitely be looking at maybe some different work hours than normal. The county is, I know, going to be looking at that for the paving of their portion of the project, which I think is scheduled to go to their board soon. Most of that project work was contemplated to occur at night due to the amount of traffic that's on Sir Francis Drake. They will be talking with the contractor and trying to see if there's, with the reduced traffic, if there's any way to pull some of that work into the daytime. And, I think we would be doing the same if we were paving East Sir Francis Drake this year. It's way too early to say for next year. At this point, we're proceeding with that project as though it's going to be night work, and as we get closer to that project, we'll have to reevaluate where we are in the world with COVID-19 and traffic volumes and things like that.
Are there any further questions of Julian? Okay.
This is Kevin. Just a couple quick ones.
Sure.
First of all, I just wanted to ask whether we have kind of worked out what we need to work out in terms of what needs to be done at the Alicio intersection next to Monair with the county. Because I know there was some concern about who was going to be responsible for some of that work.
Yes, so Sir Francis Drake corridor that's in the county project, about 93% of that footprint is in the county and about 7% of it is in the city's jurisdiction. So we've been working closely with the county to coordinate those improvements. Obviously, the county has put out the contract and their contractor will be doing all the work in both the city and in Larkspur. I would anticipate seeing some sort of an agreement come forth to memorialize the cost of who's paying for what on that project. It's the portion that's in the city will most likely be paid for by the city. That portion of Sir Francis Drake was included in the Measure B plan. But it's all being designed together. The city's reviewed the designs for those intersections. For the most part, about 90% of those intersections are in the county and one little part of it is in the city, but it needs to be designed as a whole to function properly. And so their project does have some intersection improvements to both improve traffic flow and to add some pedestrian enhancements at those intersections, including at Alicio and Berryway. And we've been coordinating with the county on what those would look like.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're being, you're confident that we're being treated in an equitable fashion as far as that's concerned.
Vice Mayor Harf, I want to just chime in. This is Dan Schwartz, City Manager, that Julian and his staff have been working very hard to make sure that what we agree to do on the East Sir Francis Drake is consistent with the Measure B allocations. So tying that back to Councilmember Candel's question, we're very likely to be able to conform what the county needs from the city to what we would have probably tried to accomplish under Measure B anyway. So I think it'll be a really nice partnership in the end.
Okay, good. That's helpful. The second question that I had is that I noticed that here in our Greenbrae community that the county is going to be doing, I don't know if they're doing resurfacing or just coating, or they're doing some things down in the unincorporated Marin part of Greenbrae. Do you have any understanding of what's going on there and what we should expect?
Yeah, they have an annual paving project, much like we do. They split theirs into a couple of different projects based on the amount of work they have to do. Most of what they're doing up in the Greenbrae Hills is a slurry seal or a microsurface based on the condition of those streets are in a little better condition and they're able to get by with a little less of an invasive treatment, and it's kind of like a thin layer of asphalt that's going over their streets. We will have some streets like that at some point in our program. We're just not there yet. We're getting through the bad streets first, but we do work with the county and make sure the city-county line is not always in the best place for one contract to end and the other to start. So we work with the
no, it is not.
To make sure that we coordinate on our paving projects and we're not paving over one another. And for example, we've got streets in Murray Park next year, and the city-county boundary is a little all over the place over there. So we're going to be working with the county to make sure that we finish in a place that makes sense for paving, and then they come up to us, and then we'll reconcile all the dollars of who did what and whose jurisdiction at the end. But yeah, we work with the county and make sure that we're not stepping on each other when we do these projects, and try to help each other out where it makes sense.
Well, and I think the city did a great job on La Cuesta. I mean, we were very fortunate to have that repaving project done early on. But you know, recently the county's been out doing patchwork down in unincorporated part of Green Bay, and I'm assuming that that's just teeing up this larger project on their part. So it will impact people, driving down the street when they get to do that. So I just want to make sure we're well coordinated.
Okay, any other questions or anything else you want to direct on this presentation, Julian?
No, that's all I had.
Okay. All right, if there's
Thank
no
you,
further
Julian.
questions.
You're doing a great job. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, this is City Manager Dan Schwartz.
Yes.
The public comment that we were waiting for came in, and the questions all pertain to operating the library in the current COVID situation. So we're going to be addressing that tonight during the budget presentation, and
Okay.
I would ask that we defer dealing with those questions until we do our budget presentation.
Okay.
But I've read all the questions that were submitted, and they'll all be addressed tonight.
Okay, good. And then we'll also get a copy of them.
Yeah.
So we're moving on to number 4, approval of the consent calendar. Do I have any member of the City Council who would like to remove an item for discussion? Seeing none, I do know that we need to pull 4.5. Allison informed me that 4.5, we need to request a continuance till the May 20th meeting because there are some minor changes in this cooperation agreement. So I'll be pulling that one and we'll bring it up next time. Are there any other ones that need to be pulled? Okay. Is there anyone in the public who's raised their hand to want to pull one of these items?
Thank you. I will search now for any people requesting consent calendar comments. And no, there is no comments for the consent calendar.
Thank you. So I'll bring it back to the council for adoption or approval of the consent calendar minus 4.5. Who would like to make that motion? Don't all jump at once. Oh, who's muted?
Sorry,
Okay,
I had the honor to make the motion.
Okay, so Councilmember Candell made the motion. Who seconded it?
I did.
I'll second.
We're having a mic delay. Can we have the roll call vote, Allison?
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Hilmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Haroff,
Yes.
Mayor Way.
Yes. Thank you. So now we move to 5, which is the city manager's oral report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm generally going to save a lot of my reporting for the items later in the agenda about dealing with sort of the world of COVID, but it's nice to know that some things are moving along in the regular pace of government. So I did want to remind the council and the community, if you're not aware, that May is Bicycle Safety Month. The Central and Police Authority will be putting out a lot of material about bicycle safety. We'll be putting out material about it. And it seemed very timely to bring it up in light of the fact that we're seeing unprecedented numbers of people using our bike and pedestrian path. And I bring it up to encourage folks to use their bikes and to bicycle safely. But I also encourage folks to remember they're sharing the road with cars when they're out on the streets, and they're sharing the paths with pedestrians when they're out on the pathways. We are getting a little bit of an uptick of concern from residents and recreators that the bike ped conflict is increasing just because of the sheer numbers that are out there. And so encourage folks to be smart, be safe, but get out there on your bicycle and enjoy the beautiful weather. I'm just going to leave that as my comment this evening, Madam Mayor. I'll be addressing a number of things later on. I should also, I guess, note, I am your representative to the Operations Committee for the Marin Wildfire Protection Authority, and I'm pleased to report the very first meeting of that body took place. The purpose of that body is to prepare the analyses and agenda items and recommendations that will be considered by the board of that organization, which Councilmember Paulson is your board member on that organization. Now I will turn it back to you, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you have a lot to report on later in the agenda, so appreciate that. And just a reminder to everyone who's listening and to the council that that's a brand new JPA, and all of those meetings are Brown Act, and they're available to be screened and watched, just like we're watching these other meetings. So we'll bring this to number 6, the council members' oral reports and comments. Who would like to begin? If anybody has any report or comment? No? Okay,
yeah,
Gabe, you start, and then Kevin, you go next. Then we'll go to Dan, and then we'll go to Scott. Oops. Audio's getting bad.
Okay, I think Kevin froze there, but he was talking. So I just had a few brief reports, kind of dovetailing off what City Manager was saying about the JPA. We're on the Twin Cities Disaster Preparedness Committee, getting some reports. There's a lot of good activity for the neighborhood response groups. They're trying to start up Hillview and Creekside, and the fire department let us know that they're working on vegetation and home inspection. That's moving forward, and there'll be more to report on that later. For the mobile home ad hoc committee, just been in touch with the stakeholders, and hopefully we'll have more at our next meeting in 2 weeks. And I think on the business, the Chamber of Commerce, that's Kevin. So that's it for me.
Okay, that segues into Kevin. How about any reports?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks, Gabe. Gabe has been very, very helpful in supporting the efforts of the chamber, and we really, those of us on the board are very appreciative of those efforts. The main thing I just wanted to announce or mention is that the Chamber of Commerce has set up a COVID-19 small business emergency fund, which is a GoFundMe program. You can get information about that on the Chamber's website. But thanks in no small part to our mayor, we have some significant funding already underway there, and we're building that up. So this is a model that most of the chambers throughout Marin have been pursuing. Some of the larger communities have, gotten a little ahead of us, but because they've got a bigger business community than we do. But we're on track, and we're moving forward with that. And we're very appreciative of Julie Cervetto, our new Chamber Executive Director, for the work and the leadership that she's showing in getting that moving forward. So please check that out and open your wallet and then throw some money in there to support our local businesses.
Terrific. Councilmember Hilmer, any reports or comments?
Only one report. At today's SMART board meeting, we heard staff reports of budget reductions for the next couple of years that can be projected, as well as recommendations that are going to be coming back to us regarding service reductions and other cost-saving measures based on sales tax reduction.
Right.
So couldn't find any good news today. Sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you.
probably doesn't look pretty right now for them. Thank you for that. Councilmember Candell, Scott?
Yeah, thank
No audio.
you. Am I?
There you are.
You're on. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Well, can you hear me? Okay, just a quick report for the Larkspur Madera school board meetings. There's a committee that was formed to try to deal with the budget shortcoming that's anticipated over the next several years. It's a crash course. We've got 2 meetings already this past week. We've got another 2 coming up, and the goal is to try to make recommendations of how to meet the new restricted budget requirements. It's a fantastic group of people, and I have full confidence we'll come up with the best solution possible.
Great, great. That leaves me. So since our last meeting, the Marin mayors and council members have met. Their mayor select committee has met, and we are going to try to have an all group meeting maybe this month. So keep that in your calendar. If not, because mainly be to talk about changing the bylaws temporarily to allow just the mayors to vote, as opposed to the entire group of 11 cities and towns representatives. So that's still in the works. I also co-chaired the PDEP committee, the Public Disaster and Education Preparedness meeting on Monday, and our guest speaker was Deputy Health Director Lisa Santora, and it was all about COVID-19. The minutes should be very interesting to see what the county's plans are. And of course, they've introduced now, it's called Recover Marin, or Marin Recovers. And I think Dan is going to speak about that later, but marinrecovers.org is the new one-stop place to look at all of COVID-19 related things within Marin County. Lastly, our Larkspur Library and Community Center ad hoc committee met since the last time we were together. We met virtually, and we will continue to be meeting like we have since last year. But the realization is we were able to tell the Larkspur Library and Community Center Foundation that at this point in our financial situation in the city, we cannot make a commitment for funding a library, a new library at this time. We'll hear more about that when we review business item 8.2 tonight. But we are continuing to discuss how that foundation can move forward with funding for private investments into a new library and community center. And I believe we'll be hearing more about that in the next couple of months. And then lastly, it's Wildfire Preparedness Week. We can't lose track of the fact that wildland fire season is right around the corner. And even though we're living in a disaster right now, we need to make sure that we encourage our neighbors and our residents to do all the vegetation management that they can around their property, including tree trimming, which is now allowed. So you can go on Fire Safe Marin's website and see all of the daily updates on what wildland fire preparation should be happening in our community now. And then last thing is our supervisor, Katie Rice in District 2 is doing regular Zoom meetings of District 2. And tomorrow she is having a 5 p.m. one with District 2 issues, and Renee Goddard, who is the mayor of Fairfax, will be speaking about what Fairfax is doing to support their community. Last week or 2 weeks ago, Brian Colbert from San Anselmo was talking. So I encourage everybody who's interested in doing that, just go on Katie Rice's, Supervisor Rice's site, and you will get the link to the Zoom meeting at 5 o'clock tomorrow. All right, let's move on to public hearings. We have one public hearing tonight, 7.1, which is to introduce and waive the first reading of Ordinance 1048 to adopt amendments to Chapter 9.54, the noise control regulations of the City of Larkspur to exempt emergency generators. And I will direct everyone to see a public comment that has been submitted by the Archers, and it is there to be viewed by the public, and it is available for the council members to have read already. So can we hear a staff report?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we're going to turn this over to Planning and Building Director Neil Toth.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Hi, Neil.
Hello. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. It's good to see you. I'm here tonight to present an ordinance for updates to our noise ordinance, primarily to establish exceptions to the specific use of backup power generators, particularly during planned power shutoffs. This report has largely been prepared by Kristen Tyke, our senior planner. She's with us tonight and could assist me in answering any more technical questions that might escape me. And as you did note, it was an item of late mail from Mr. Archer. So Just a quick background, in the last several years, there's been a series of catastrophic fires, and many of these started due to failures in PG&E power lines. And as a result, PG&E has implemented public power safety shutoffs, or PSPS events, to actively shut down the power grids. Most recent PSPS events have had some portions of Marin County without power for several days to over a week. And given the patterns of climate change, we anticipate these events will continue regularly into the future and into what is becoming a longer dry season as well. Now, both residents and critical services in the Larkspur community have need for readily available emergency power during unexpected catastrophes, and particularly during these PSPS events. And in the most recent shutdown, we know many residents relied on portable generators, and interest in installation of permanent emergency backup generators has increased notably. And the difficulty is generators are fairly noisy. They can be a nuisance to surrounding properties and persons. And depending upon the make, location, and hours of use, can be a particular, potentially a health problem. Further, the use of portable gas and diesel fire generators present a fire safety concern, particularly in the wildland urban interface areas, and potentially compound significant fire events. This is a concern of the Central Larkspur Police Department, Fire Department. The current noise ordinance makes no specific exemption for backup generators. The only exemption is for emergency activities. We have interpreted this to apply to emergency police, fire, utility providers, the sort of work done in for emergency event, not necessarily applied to private residential properties. The noise limits are generally too restrictive to apply to most generators, particularly for prolonged periods and nighttime use. So we are proposing these amendments primarily to exempt the use of portable and permanently installed generators from the noise limits, but under very specific conditions. So in preparing these amendments, we reviewed some recent analysis and other recent updates in several surrounding communities on this topic. We have largely modeled these revisions based on code updates in San Rafael, with some modifications deemed to be more appropriate for Larkspur. So principally, the amendments regulate emergency generators by three categories: portable generators, stationary generators for general use, primarily residential or commercial, and stationary generators for public service buildings, healthcare, or utility providers. So for portable generators, these are typically diesel or gas fired, and we are only exempting these from the noise ordinance to support emergency work as specifically defined. And that's particularly for emergency responders or construction to repair under emergency conditions. These would not be exempted for the purpose of general use for power shutoffs for residents. I would note some cities have permitted portable generators to provide emergency power to residential properties, and sometimes they will outline setbacks and or time limits or some maximum noise limits. However, our fire department does not prefer to encourage use of these types of units, and our ordinance is drafted to encourage the use of fixed natural gas powered generators that can safely operate at rather moderated noise levels. So stationary generators for general use, any property, residential or commercial, could be permanently installed. These would be gas powered generators and exempted from the strict application of the noise regulations, provided they meet specific design requirements for their noise generation. These types of generators are preferred by the fire department as opposed to diesel or gas fired generators. Stationary generators for public service buildings, healthcare providers, and utilities are subject to the same standards, but can be gas, diesel, or natural gas powered. These uses are primarily might need gas or diesel powered generators as the necessary types to assure operation and or flexibility depending upon field conditions, particularly like the water district needing to run a pump station or something like that, or to keep lights on. Both stationary generator requirements have noise level limits. Fixed generators are not to exceed 70 dBA. When measured in compliance with the code, these would be by specification for the generator itself. And this level is consistent with the sound of washing machines, air conditioners, and dishwashers. And many, in the industry, many of the gas-powered generators meet this type of specification. As you go up to 85 dBA, you're getting a sound more like a vacuum cleaner or hand saw. And this is closer to a diesel-fired generator, typical diesel-fired. So the concept here is to allow a sound that moderately exceeds the current noise limits, but is less of a nuisance than would be a standard portable generator. And we'd like to note San Rafael did a lot of analysis to review the industry standards, and to reach this level of specification. We've also applied a setback of 10 feet from property lines. This is the most conservative of setbacks generally applied by the other communities. And combined with this, with the setbacks to other structures, this should help reduce the decibel rating as well. We've included specifications for routine testing, trying to limit the time and period of that. Again, the basic concept here is to be able to approve permits for generators by specifications at the time of the permit review, as opposed to the various parameters of the noise ordinance, which present a series of conditions that might differ depending upon the site or the amount of use and the hours of use. We did propose a few other amendments. We're not here to overhaul the noise ordinance, but we did have a couple things we wanted to correct while we were at it. One was in the table of adjustments to the exterior noise limits. We've often found it difficult to permit very typical residential mechanical equipment, even with compliance setbacks, particularly with the -5 penalty adjustment to the decibel level. So this category with the penalty has been amended to remove the descriptor of hum from this -5 category. The descriptor talks about screeches and whines. That would be sort of broken equipment. Hum is characteristic of the white noise, typical with pool pumps or AC equipment. And we think this will make it a little easier for us to be able to approve replacement of HVAC or pool equipment, as it's often very much in the gray zone. We've also added some clarification to the exceptions for days and times of construction. Our noise ordinance limits provides an exception for construction, but limits the times of and days for that. And there are exceptions you can make to that. We just simply wanted to clarify and provide a clear process for these requirements and outline the need for notification to surrounding properties. So an example would be a request by a public utility to conduct night work to complete upgrades along a busy roadway or a bridge. So these rarely happen, but we sought to just provide a clearer process when we get these types of requests. So in conclusion, we recommend the City Council hear the staff report, open the public hearing, move to introduce and waive first reading of Ordinance 1048, amending Chapter 9.54 as drafted. We did note the Council does have options. You could determine that all generators, first, No generators should be exempted from the current noise limits, except for emergency activities and emergency work. And if you do believe in this approach, we require no further action. If you determine any and all backup generators should be exempt from the noise regulations when used during catastrophes or emergency events such as the PSPS, you can direct staff to prepare a specific exemption within the noise control regulations to that effect. You could also direct us to prepare other modifications to the ordinance to either change permitted noise levels, setbacks, or apply some stringent restrictive hours of operation. But in considering these options, just to note again, these are tailored for the purpose of the building department having the ability to issue permits for fixed generators based upon specific design standards, not site conditions or performance standards or hours of operations. And while we can apply these things, the enforcement of noise violation during evenings and weekends are typically must be enforced by the CMPA or the police department. And they have indicated they have little availability to address these types of nuisance issues during emergency events and power shutoffs. So with that, I'll ask if the council has any questions for staff. So.
Thank you very much, Neil. Let's begin before we open the public comments. Let's begin with any questions you all might have of staff. Does anyone have questions of staff at this moment?
So this is Kevin, just a really kind of simple, basic clarification. When we're talking about gas generators, we're talking about gasoline generators, not natural gas generators, which would be hooked up permanently to your house.
Yes, gas, I think we've identified gas and diesel as opposed to natural gas. So when we say, when it's defined as natural gas, that means natural gas versus gas is gasoline.
So that would essentially, for the natural gas generators, that means a permanent connection with the gas line at your house, correct?
Correct. And one thing we didn't go into detail here is the fire code and building code and fire code present some code restrictions to having other type of fuel generators and fuel containers, particularly within the WUI zone. So the one generator that's fairly simple for permitting is a natural gas generator that's tied to natural gas, where it's not gas storage or other type of fuel or diesel storage on site.
Right. I just wanted to ask that question because sometimes, you know, people use the terminology of gas in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's referred to as gasoline, sometimes it's referred to as natural gas, sometimes it's referred to as propane or methane or something else. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that when we're talking about the stationary gas line equipment, we're talking about a tie-in to your natural gas line at your home, and the rest of them are really referring to portable equipment that you have to bring in some kind of fossil fuel supply to motor it up.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Any other, Gabe, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. A couple questions. Neil, I don't know if this was part of your analysis for Larkspur or the San Rafael noise ordinance analysis, but is there some sense of the times and the locations where this might be the greatest problem? So for example, the category 2 non-portables and the category 3 non-portables, do we know any locations where the noise ordinance issues might arise? You know, based on the last summer, for example.
Well, I'm sorry. I think you kind of cut out, but I think your question was, are there situations where, or do we know situations where the fixed generators will create a nuisance or are likely to create a nuisance? Was that the question?
Yeah, good. Close enough.
Well, I think we've had actually, to be honest, we had very few, if any, complaints related to generators. I think we've had during the last power shut off, I think we had 1 or 2 complaints about neighbors with portable generators. We've issued very few permits up to this point for fixed generators in the neighborhoods. And because of the noise limits, those generators often had to, because of the prior noise limits, those generators often had to be located in such a way or enclosed to be baffled. So it presented some larger challenges to property owners to either locate or to add fixtures to really baffle those to meet the current noise limits. But we haven't, I don't know that this would be, I mean, there may be certain situations and certain conditions where some people will be affected or will have some issues with a neighbor whose generator that meets these requirements, but it's a washing machine sort of outside their window across the fence. And on a warm night with open windows, that might be, you know, not their preference. Will it be a regular complaint or a significant complaint? I don't know.
I think we're, you know, it's new. I don't think most of us in the West Coast have had to have generators. So it's a new situation that we're going to have to play. Well, we're going to have to see how it plays out if a lot of people get these, but we're going to have PSPSs for the next 10 years for sure. Any other question of Neil before we open it up to the public? No? Neil, I had just had one question. As far as enforcement, are we, is this item consistent with our other 2 CMPA jurisdictional cities, San Anselmo and Corte Madera, so that there's consistent enforcement opportunities?
I don't believe it's exactly consistent. If I understand, Corte Madera essentially has identified backup generators as emergency equipment and has exempted them from the noise ordinance across the board.
Backup portable generators.
Backup portable generators or any type of, whether it's portable or fixed, they've exempted them from the noise ordinance. And I'm not sure what tax San Anselmo has taken. I'd have to check and see if Kristen checked on that.
And do you know what their rationale was for disregard or exempting them? Because our emergency work definition is it appears a little narrow, but how did we get the emergency work definition?
Well, the emergency work previously was a little vague, and that is something that people have pointed to say, I want to put in my generator and it should be exempt from the noise ordinance. So we're not going to, so we wouldn't have any standard to apply to that. We didn't feel comfortable taking, we certainly didn't feel comfortable taking that approach in the past, and we've applied the noise ordinance to generators. We did not, as we mentioned, we did not interpret that to mean that a private generator to keep your house running was necessarily represented emergency work. And if you have the opportunity to build it in a way that it's safe and contained and containing the noise, then that would be acceptable. And of course, again, we didn't live with power shutoffs that were anticipated to go for several days or weeks. So and I think in response to add on to your question, we did talk with the police department about these different approaches. And again, a lot of their feedback, and I don't know if Mike, if Chief Norton is listening or has any input to say, but certainly some of his feedback was the reality during any kind of catastrophic event or during the PSPS, noise issues are really not the primary concern of the police department. So their larger concern is, one, that people are safe, that they're functional, and I believe it, and the fire department would really prefer to not see a proliferation of portable generators throughout the neighborhoods. So we're trying to find a nice medium here.
Okay.
Before we do leave, I have to mention there is one additional item that the city attorney had pointed out to me. When you do make a motion, if you do make a motion tonight, we do have a reference in the ordinance which refers to enforcement, and it refers to an old code section. And we've since moved that code around. So when we get there, I'd like to just clarify one other amendment that we can add into this tonight if you decide to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll close our conversation at this point and bring it to the public hearing. So the public hearing is open. Is there anyone, Allison, who is interested in making public comment?
There is. Thank you, Mayor Way. We'll start with Kevin Carroll. It is your turn to make public comment.
I'm Kevin Carroll from Redwood Highway. Just a couple of comments. One, I think that issue of this falling on the police department is something that might be better explored with the other communities involved. And so there is a coordination among all the communities and the police department as to enforcement or how they would handle the situation. Two, it was mentioned that there were only 2 complaints last year, which I think banning the portable generators so completely just because of 2 complaints doesn't make much sense to me, particularly since supposedly these power shutoffs are only supposed to last 5 or 6 years, and supposedly we'll be out of the woods on that after that period of time. And also the public comment by the Archer family is very well taken, and I've heard this from a number of people, that they just can't get auxiliary power sources and Tesla power walls and the rest of it installed, both because of the current COVID-19 crisis and the fact that there's just a backlog in orders of people wanting to install these. And so you're cutting off those people who intend to have those systems installed that would be completely compliant. You're sort of leaving them out in the cold for this coming year, and we don't know how many shutoffs we're going to have. It's been said this has been a light rain year, and this could be a very long situation that we're going to be facing. So maybe portable generators, there could be a time limit set as to how late they can run, like 10 p.m., but maybe revisit the issue of portable generators in a year and see what complaints come in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Carroll. Is there anyone else who's raised their hand to give public comment?
Thank you. There's no further public comment regarding this item. There is a general public comment, which if you'd like to conclude this item and revisit at the end of the agenda, I could read at that time.
And it's not on a matter that's on the agenda?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so, and there have been no public comments sent in by email on this matter?
Correct. There's no further public comment.
Okay, well.
Mayor Way, if I could just comment just in response, I think, to the comment to make sure it's clear. The ordinance is not banning portable generators. It simply is applying the current noise limits to portable generators. So some portable generators are built to run very quietly. And and they're not it's not something the city permits or doesn't permit. They're portable. So if somebody does get a generator and it's of a type to run quietly, they can meet the noise ordinance, and that's not a problem. Or if they run a generator that still exceeds the noise ordinance, but people do not complain, again, it's not necessarily an issue that we're banning. Work with your neighbors. We would be entirely, this doesn't speak to backup battery systems or anything like that. So we We continue to encourage and support solar roofs, solar systems, backup batteries, and we actually have an ordinance that expedites those types of permits. So anyway, that was just my comments.
Okay, thank you for clarifying some of that. So if we've closed the public hearing, I'll bring it back to the 5 members of the City Council. Do we have further questions before we discuss this? Seeing none, does anyone want to open up the conversation for what we think about this agenda item? I know this is an awkward way of doing our meetings, but if anybody's...
No, this is Kevin. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that has gone into this presentation, and you know, unless others have matters to discuss in that regard, I'd be happy to move the matter forward.
Does anyone else have any item or part of this that they want to have clarification or discussion about? Okay, seeing none, I thank you for clarifying about portable generators. That was my main question about that. I think Mr. Carroll's idea of re-evaluating this after this next cycle of PSPS might be a very useful thing for us to do. I know on my street in October or November of last year, there were probably 4 portable generators in 4 houses in a row, and that can become a compounding level of noise. So I'd like to keep track of that to make sure that we can encourage people to use these only for emergency purposes.
Just a quick question for Neil. Just on the distinction between the portables and the permanent. I assume, and I know that the noise level with the permanently installed generators, natural gas generation equipment, is much lower than the portables.
So that is my understanding. Is the natural gas generally runs at a lower decibel rating than the portables. And again, there are many portables that are designed to run more quietly, and that probably costs more. Depends on the price points, but the natural gas generators, these limits fit most any standard model for natural gas.
So it's kind of like the same as an air conditioner, or less, I assume.
Probably.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think the important public education from something like this is that these PSPSs that are anticipated are now the realization with better surveillance and better weather stations by PG&E, they can probably give us 5 to 7 days, if not a week's to 10 days notice that they may be lowering the power or turning the power off entirely. So people can prepare in advance that they don't have a fully stocked refrigerator, or they have other alternative light sources for their home, or they've made arrangements for backup battery power for some of their items, so that they don't need to always rely on portable generators unless they have emergent needs or medical equipment needs. I think we need to continue that dialogue with people to plan in advance. That these are things you can hopefully work with your family or your neighborhood and plan in advance to not need to have to completely power your home if that's not necessary. So it sounds like we have no other questions from the council. So do I have a motion? And we'll need to make that code adaptation number. Could you refine that again, Neil, what you were talking about?
Yes, on the second last page of the ordinance, or third last, page 9 of the ordinance, at the bottom, section 9.54090, violation penalty. Any person violating any provision of this chapter is guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction thereof shall be punished as specified in Larkspur Municipal Code section. We would strike 1.01.110 and replace it with 9.24.070.
Okay, did everybody get that? Allison, did you get all that?
Yes.
Okay. Are there questions on that change?
No. So as clarified, I'd be happy to make a motion to introduce and waive first reading ordinance 1048 to adopt amendments to chapter 9.54 on the noise control regulations of the Larkspur Municipal Code.
Do I have a second? Scott
I'll
seconded
second
it?
that. No, Scott.
Second.
All in favor?
Don't all jump in at once.
We'll need to do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Hilmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Haroff.
Yes.
Mayor Way.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for that. We're moving on to business item 8.1, consider adoption of resolution 2120 approving retention of Hinderliter, Llamas and Associates, or HDL, for sales and use tax related services, which was an item continued from April 15th, 2020. Can I have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm coming back on now, hopefully on the screen.
Yes, you are.
This is a continued item, and I just wanted to add for clarification from the previous discussion and the written material. The city needs the services of an entity that has authorization to enter into the Department of Tax and Fee Administration's database to look at sales tax receipts in those databases. And then that entity also has to have the depth of staffing and capability to analyze that data and provide your Administrative Services Director, Kathy Orm, and me with analyses that we can incorporate into our budgeting and projections and monitoring for the current fiscal year and future fiscal years. For a long time, we had an entity called Muni Services, which was purchased by a large company called Avenue. We haven't been satisfied for a while with Avenue. We've been impressed with what HDL has been doing for other Marin entities, including the County of Marin. So they have a database that encompasses all of Marin County because they have the county itself as a client. And it's our feeling that Larkspur would benefit from retaining HDL to provide the auditing and analysis of sales and use tax. So we are asking the council to approve the attached resolutions, which would authorize us to retain them for that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Turn back to you.
Are there questions? I see Councilmember Candela has a question. Oh, your mic's off.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
There you go.
I was the one who put. Oh, hello, can you hear me? Okay. I was the one who pulled this off the consent calendar when it was on last. The reason was because I had some experiences with HDL that were not fantastic. I have since had a chance to follow up with the different cities that used HDL. I spoke to our city manager about it, and my understanding is that we are retaining them for a very limited purpose of the sales and use tax. My experience did not overlap with sales and use tax. My understanding is they have a separate division that deals with sales and use tax, which I have no experience with and nothing negative to say about. As such, I would support this as it is today.
Thank you for that. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Anyone other questions for the city manager? Okay. So we don't need to open this up to the public, do we? I guess we can.
It's a business item. It's at your discretion, Madam Mayor.
Is there anyone in the audience who would be interested in speaking on this matter?
There is no one with hands raised to speak and no emails have been received.
Okay, so bringing it back to all of us, if there's no further discussion, I'll take a motion for resolution 2120.
I'll move.
Second.
That looks like that was Councilmember Hilmer and Councilmember Paulson. So can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Hilmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hara,
Yes.
Mayor Way.
Yes. All right, thank you very much. We will move on to 8.2, which is a review of the Zimmer endowment account. And I would like to point out to the public that there have been submitted 4 written public comments on this matter, which are available to view, and all of the council members have had an opportunity to see these. But we will also have an opportunity if anybody else in the audience would like to make a comment. So can we have the staff report, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor. This agenda item is brought to you at the request of council members to have a discussion and potentially provide some direction to council about the use of what staff refers to as the Zimmer endowment account. We were very fortunate, as were the Corte Madera Branch Library and the Mill Valley Library, to receive a substantial donation from the Zimmer Family Trust upon the passing of Mr. Zimmer. In total, the donation to the city turned out to be a little more than $750,000. When that donation came in, the council put it in a restricted account and said that the principal would be held by the council for its discretion, and it would be used at this time as an investment vehicle that would generate interest, and that interest would then be made available to the library for uses that might otherwise not be funded within the budget of the library. Since that time, the council made one change, withdrawing $150,000 from the account and using it as a initial donation to what is now referred to as the Commons Foundation. That donation was made in 3 phases. As the foundation raised money, the donation from the Zimmer money was used as a matching grant sort of setup. And to date, the balance of the principal remains in this restricted account. And we now turn over to the council for your discussion on whether there's any aspect of this arrangement you desire to revisit.
So to summarize that, the current situation that the council had last decided on was that this would remain in an endowment, remain an investment vehicle, and the interest to be used for our current library needs. And we've made one change to that, which was last year when we donated some seed money to the Commons. So this item was asked to be brought forward by Councilmember Hilmer and Councilmember Candell. So would you like to open the discussion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just like to say that the intention for my request was substantively to affirm the current requirements that the council has in place for the Zimmer account. I'm not requesting review for the purpose of considering changing anything, but I think it's important to clarify the current city intention for that account. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Scott, would you like to go? Oh, your
Thank
mic.
you. Can you hear me? I'm having trouble with the sound.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just delayed. Okay. So the only thing I also wanted, and I think we're on the same page on this, is I think our community would like us to give them some direction about our views on this fund, not just for now, but for the future. I think it's fair to say
Wait.
We're in a tough spot right now financially. I don't know if it's realistic for us to. Can you not hear me?
I can't hear you.
Oh.
You're going in and out.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going in and out.
I'll pass.
No, can you
Okay.
put a different mic on, or let's see.
If you turn off your camera, you might get better bandwidth for the comments.
Get everybody in the household to turn off their Wi-Fi. Okay, we'll come back to you, Scott. Gabe, was there something you wanted to bring up?
Okay, my camera is off. Can you hear me better?
Okay, much better.
Yeah, that came in much better.
It's a struggle.
Camera
I'm
came
sorry, were you
back
talking
on.
to me?
There we go.
Scott, keep
Right.
the camera off.
Okay,
Okay,
Scott, so we can hear you.
If my
Scott,
camera is off, can you hear me?
better.
Okay,
Better.
so what I was trying to say, okay, good. What I was saying is I think that our community is looking for us to give them a direction on what we are planning to do, what our thoughts are with this fund. I realize that with COVID, our budget is completely up in the air and we'll be dealing with that over the next couple of months. But at this point, I think what we can do is give our intentions, and the intention being we'll keep the endowment the same way it is right now, but at some point, if the private sector is able to raise money for this new library, that we would commit to using this money for that new library. And I don't know if council is willing to make that statement today. I, for one, am, because I think that was the purpose of the fund, and be comfortable, committing to that. If like I said, if the private sector is able to raise enough money so that this would help them complete the project that we're trying to complete. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Comments on that? Yes, Gabe?
Yeah, I think that partly where we are with COVID makes the question more difficult to answer. I think one way to look at a fund like this is to ensure that with any budget shortfalls, we have maximum library services and can enhance library services. And another would be to say, if there's a new construction or something that's viable and agreed upon, to apply to that. And I would say short of, our budget analysis and going through our budget cycle, I feel it would be premature for the council to really give, more clear direction on which of those two paths to take.
All right, Kevin, you want to weigh in on this?
And I'm sorry, Catherine, I know you can't see me, so.
Yeah, so let's see, Kevin is, I think, Kevin, do you want to weigh in on this? We can't see Scott,
no,
and Dan Schwartz has left the room.
Yeah, Dan's disappeared there. So I don't really.
I'm still here on audio.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I think preserving the status quo on this matter is the right way to go.
So,
Madam Mayor, if I may, I know you can't see
sure.
me, but I just have a comment.
Go, Scott.
Okay, so I think the question before us is we're going to have a budget shortfall, and we may have the ability to not use money that is earmarked for the library, put that in the general fund, and then use the Zimmer money for the library as basically a way to work around this and get that money into the general fund. And the question is, I don't think that was the intention of the donor when they gave the money for the Zimmer fund. I think it was meant to be for a library,
right,
not in difficult times to take the money from the library and use it for other things. So I guess the question that I am posing is, being that we're in those difficult times right now, is our intention as a group to try to take money from the library, use the Zimmer fund for the daily expenses, and thus be able to meet some of our budget issues? Or are we in a position that the donor wanted this to go towards a library, even though difficult times are ahead, we are still going to commit to earmarking this for the library, whether it's present, future, however we choose to do that.
So Catherine, you asked me for my views on that. And again, I think preserving the status quo, again, is important. we do have some fiduciary obligations here in terms of managing those funds. And since it's not money that we have generated through our usual revenue generation processes, it's important to respect the intent of the donor. And I would be very reluctant to deviate from that.
And I see Dan Hilmer shaking his head. So
I'm in total agreement.
With what?
all right.
With me?
With
Yes.
keeping the status quo, which is
Yeah.
that we decided to leave it in an investment vehicle for the interest for the uses of the library. Last year it was $32,000 of principal generated $32,600 for the library. And we did make one change to it, which was to seed money for the commons. But it sounds like we are in the majority, the 3 council members that I'm looking at, don't feel that at this time we can affirm that this money will be specifically allocated to building a future library at this time. Am I hearing that from everyone? That we want to keep the decision as it was decided in the most recent council meeting? Yes, Scott?
And I'm sorry, just speaking for myself.
Sure.
I'm sorry you can't see me. I got my hand up, but just speaking from my position, I think if we feel that we would like to put this money towards a future library, if we could indicate that, I think it would help the private sector in their fundraising and help us get this project moving. If I'm the only one that feels that way, clearly, we're not going to do that. But my thought would be, if we do feel it is going to be go towards a future library, if we as a group could indicate that, it would help. That's all. So that would be my position.
I'm sensing
and I appreciate that.
I'm sensing from just my colleagues here that they don't feel like we're in a position right now to make that an affirmative statement. Am I hearing that right from everybody? Gabe, yes?
Yeah, just a question. It sounded like there's kind of 3 different paths here. So Scott is, proposing more of a commitment of the Zimmer funds for future building, and then the status quo is it's in an account for the library, and the interest, will be used, and who knows how the principal will be used. The third option I'm not clear about, and maybe the city manager can clarify. Is this in a special account where there is no possibility of pulling it out and using it in the general fund or for non-library purposes?
Would you like me to respond, Madam Mayor?
Yes, please.
So there's a couple of issues at hand. The first is that it's in an account that the council restricted by resolution. So staff is not allowed to move that money. We each year are required to propose how to use the interest from the account, but the principal has been restricted by council policy, so it sits there. And our auditors are aware of that restriction, and each year in the audit account for whether we've complied with that restriction. So we couldn't move the money into the general fund for general purposes unless the council wanted to have that discussion and lift its restrictions. Now that said, the donor, the Zimmer Family Trust, specified that the uses of the money had to be for the Larkspur Library. It's a very broad definition of what it could be used for. All it said was for the Larkspur Library. But I think that you would run afoul of the trust documents, and if the trust, if folks from the trust were monitoring your use, I think you'd have a compliance issue that you'd rather avoid. And then just as a minor point, as your Treasurer Administrative Services Director, Kathy Orm, put the money in CDs to improve the returns we've been getting. So it's actually locked up twice, and then we have to wait for the maturity on the CDs before we really would be able to touch the money.
So essentially it is, it's sort of put in investment documents that shield it from being used for other purposes outside of the library itself. And there's no nothing that says that and in the future we may not move it into a different thing. But at this point, it sounds like the majority of the council members would like to leave it as status quo as what we decided last year. Am I hearing that from everybody? I hear Dan.
Yeah.
Yes, Gabe, your hand's raised.
I just wanted to clarify my position. I consent, but I wanted to be clear that whether it's the terms of the trust or our council resolution or, you know, the fact that it's locked in a CD, I definitely want to voice my support for the library, you know, Zimmer funds being used for the library. I want to repeat that I'm not opposed to using it for other purposes, but I just want to say that at this point in the budget cycle, I wouldn't want to make that commitment. I just wanted to state that publicly. So there's consensus, but with that clarification.
Anyone else? I'm hearing all this howling in the background. It must be 8 o'clock. Everybody's howling out the windows. Yeah.
Yep, it is.
So it sounds like we are affirming our position that we took last year to leave it in, and at this point do not feel comfortable to say that we would commit it in any other direction at this point.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
I'm going to
sir.
steal the city clerk's thunder. I'm also able to see there are members of the audience who want to speak.
Oh, okay. Thank you for reminding me of that. We did have 4 written public comments, so I will ask Allison to see if there's anyone who would like to now comment that has not already commented.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll start with Christy Ellensweek. It's your turn to give public comment.
Thank you. Good evening. It's Christy Ellensweig. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. I live in the Baltimore Canyon neighborhood in Larkspur, and I'm an active member of the Larkspur Library Foundation. I just wanted to voice my support as a parent with young children. I would like to suggest that although we're in extraordinary times here, that I do support retaining the Zimmer Endowment for the future new library building project, and using the Zimmer Endowment annual distributions to support the library operating budget.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Okay, our next public comment will be from Gabriel Gesmer. It's your turn to give public comment.
Thank you. Good evening. This is Gabe Gesmer. I live on Camellia Circle in the Rose Lane neighborhood. And as many of you know, that is very close to the proposed library site. I purchased my condo here 6 years ago, in part because the city plan called for construction of a library community center close at hand. And I've been active with the now called Commons Foundation in organizing and fundraising. I'm relieved to hear that the council is not inclined to use any part of the Zimmer funds for general operating expenses. Back in 2016, when the gifts to the 3 cities were announced, officials of all 3 cities were interviewed by the Marin IJ about how the money ought to be spent, and unanimously, including Dan Schwartz, they said it should go for one-time capital expenses. Dan mentioned things like technology upgrades and enhanced collections. And since then, Larkspur has used the money accordingly, either for annual unusual expenses outside the regular operating budget or for the seed monies for the new library. I would very much like to see the city be bolder and make a pledge, as with the $150,000 in seed money, to put up most or all of the balance in return for the Commons Foundation reaching designated fundraising targets. For example, the city pledged 500,000 of the remaining 6 at the point where the Commons Foundation succeeds in raising $5 million. That would be a huge help to our private fundraising efforts. So in this, I think I'm most nearly voicing the opinions of Councilmember Candell, and I would hope that that view would be seriously considered. Our fundraising efforts at the foundation have been severely hampered, as have so many things, by the COVID problem and the city's inability to contribute as much as it had hoped. But it would be a big help to our private fundraising if we could point out that the city still has confidence and is still willing to pledge significant money towards our fundraising goal. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Are there further members of the public who are raising their hand?
There are, yes. Our next public comment will be Diane Pike. Diane, if you would unmute yourself, and it's your turn to give public comment.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Diane Pike. I'm the Vice President of Friends of the Library and live in Cape Marin in Green Bay. And I've been a strong library supporter for many years. Like Scott Candell and Gabe Gesmer, I strongly support the council in giving the support of the bequest, the Zimmer bequest endowment, to the library for our capital campaign, because it would indeed strengthen the fundraising efforts. And because the bequest was made to be used for the Larkspur Library, I would urge the city to retain the Zimmer endowment for the future new library project, and to use the endowment, the annual distributions, to support the library operating budget, as it has done. And we appreciate that the initial $150,000 investment in our future library. And we hope that even in these difficult times, we can continue to pursue the Commons, developing a community library center. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pike.
And there's one more. We have public comment from Joe Jennings. Joe, it's your turn.
Hi, this is Joe Jennings. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I live at 208 Monte Vista. I'm the president of the Larkspur, or pardon me, the Commons Foundation. And I want to thank Councilman Hilmer and Candell for bringing this up. You are under a lot of financial pressure and a lot of issues, and to have the council reaffirm the integrity of the Zimmer endowment and leave the opportunity open for it to be part of a new building is a grace-filled moment. So thank you. I also appreciate the positions of Gabe and Paulson and Kevin Haroff of wanting to also pay attention to the potential needs of the city. So we all have to be practical and reasonable in these times. But it is a huge help if just to have it reaffirmed. Councilman Hilmer, once again, you surprised me, but thank you. And Councilman Scott. But I can tell you, we're already working on trying to increase the annual fund support for the library, working with the Friends of the Library and hopefully soon the Library Foundation. We hope to be able to increase the online presence of the library this summer and serve underserved populations, particularly families with children where the Parks and Rec programs won't be able to be done this year. So your continued support for the current library and the future library is critical to our success, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Joe. I've lost Kevin on my screen. Is he still here? Kevin's dropped off my screen. Can anybody else see him?
No, you can't see me because for some reason
Oh.
I'm off, but I'm on audio because I do it on I do my audio on the phone, so I
Okay.
don't have to rely on the web stuff. So I'm here, but I can't see you.
So I appreciate the public comments, and I would encourage everyone to not drop off the line. If you can stick around to see what our next several items will be, I think it'll be instructive as to what the situation that we find ourselves in, particularly 8.5, our city financial update, and some changes to some structure in the city that has to be done to meet this crisis. My feelings on this is that I think we have opportunity in the future to possibly use some of these funds for further seeding a new project, but I'm not and can't feel fiduciarily responsible to commit that right now until we get through this crisis, and who knows how long that's going to last. Our budgetary hits are going to be enormous. We're looking 6 figures this year, 7 next year, and whether we cycle through another phase of business closures in the 2021, 2022 era years, we don't know. So it sounds like from my council members that have spoken that they are supportive of keeping the Zimmer Trust Endowment account in the status quo that we had decided last year. Am I correct with that with everyone at this point? It sounds like that's the consensus. So I think the direction that we are giving is that at this point we are leaving our decision as it stands. Of course, that doesn't mean it can't be re-examined in another time in which we feel the confidence in our being able to meet the city's basic needs can happen. And, you know, I beat this drum a lot that our primary responsibility is to public safety and the health of our community. So we'll see in our budget analysis and city financial update that public safety of fire and police and other ways in which our roads and infrastructure need to take priority in moments of crisis like this. So thank you everyone for your comments, and they will be affirmed. And I look forward to continuing to work with the Commons Foundation. We are meeting again this month, and we have had some discussions about further presentations by them to the council in the next 2 or 3 months. So let's move on to 8.3, if I don't hear any other objections. Oh, before Allison, I'm sorry, before we move on, you said you had another public comment had come in on a different matter?
Yes, this public comment came in for general public comment. I will read it now if you would like, or we can forward it to you after the meeting.
Is it a long one, or is there, can you?
No, it'll be brief. I will go ahead and read it if that's all right.
Yeah, go ahead and read it, and then forward it also.
Okay, this is from Anthony McKissich of Redwood Highway. To City Council, I write to support Ms. Delkowski's public comment letter regarding the upcoming rent increase at Marin Park. On April 14, during the most recent virtual ad hoc committee meeting, Ms. Guerra agreed to provide in a timely, speedy manner to the 2 council members a proposal stating Marin Park management ownership stance on rent increases. It is now 22 days and counting. When will there be action? My wife and I are kept in a distressing state of uncertainty. Our space rent is scheduled to increase 8.73% on June 1st. Thank you, Tony McKessich. End of comment.
Thank you, Allison, for reading that, and make sure that that's posted on the public comment section and that we have access to it too. So we're moving on now, and I don't think we'll take any more public comment that comes in since the meeting's been going on for an hour and 45 minutes. So I think most people will have submitted something if they missed logging on early. 8.3 is council committee appointments. We have 2 committees that have just started up, and would we have a staff report from the city manager, please?
Very briefly, Madam Mayor, the Marin County Council of Mayors and Councilmembers has chosen to form an economic recovery committee. We had initially understood that the council was to make one appointment to that committee. We learned today you have the option to appoint 2 of your members to that committee. That's an ad hoc committee that is working collaboratively with among each other to come up with suggestions and recommendations for how to transition as we go through the recovery process. As the council's probably aware, Marin Recovers launched, which is a website that's going to have a process behind it whereby the County of Marin will review suggestions on how to transition to whatever our new normal is going to be. And I anticipate that this MCCMC committee will be able to provide recommendations to those review processes. And there'll probably be recommendations with a lot more depth, obviously, because they'll have the access to city staff to help them put it together. And just for a matter of disclosure to the council, the 2 city managers that have been asked to sit in and provide support to this committee are myself and Adam Pulitzer from Sausalito.
And also
and
on that.
Also,
and just
sorry,
to,
there
just,
isn't.
and just to also one more level of disclosure is that this committee got started and had a meeting almost right away. And the first meeting was held last Friday online before anybody, before we had this opportunity to meet. And I asked the 2 Chamber of Commerce representatives to represent us at that meeting at the time. So that was Vice Mayor Hoff and Gabe Paulson, because we hadn't had a chance, we didn't have this council meeting scheduled yet, this item on the council meeting to talk yet. So go ahead now, Dan, finish your part 2.
Oh, I just also wanted to note that the Larkspur Corte Madera School District has launched a financial advisory committee to begin to review the anticipated budget reductions that they're going to experience. And as part of your appointments tonight, the mayor proposes that the council acknowledge that she's requested that Councilmember Candell, as liaison to the school district, serve on that fiscal advisory committee.
Okay, so we have, we can break this into 2 categories. I think I had asked Scott to participate on the the Larkspur Corte Madera School District, and it sounds like they've met already. This meeting has met a couple of times and have many meetings scheduled in advance. So I'd like to confirm that you would still continue doing that.
Yes.
Unless there's, and I don't think someone else has that interest at this moment, but you're the perfect fit, I believe. So do we have anyone else interested in the Marin Council of Mayors Economic Recovery other than Kevin and Gabe? Okay, so I'll take a motion. Oh, sorry, Kevin.
I'm sorry. So it's 1 person or 2 people on that? Because
I confirmed with Vice Mayor.
I understand 2.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I confirmed with.
Yeah. Okay.
I confirmed with Vice Mayor Colbert from San Anselmo today that it's up to 2. So some cities are sending 1 and an alternate, and others are sending 2. So it's up to 2.
I vote for that.
Okay, are you you 2 are still interested in serving on that? All right.
Yeah, you bet.
So it sounds like we don't really need a motion. We just need an affirmation of that. Is that true? Or do we need a motion to do those appointments?
Your past practice has been for the council to vote to affirm the mayor's appointments.
Okay. Who would like to propose that?
So moved.
That's Councilmember Hilmer. Who seconds? Don't speak up too fast. Who seconds that one?
I'll second it.
Okay.
I will second that.
All right. Allison, may we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Candell,
Yes.
Councilmember Hilmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Haroff.
Yes.
Mayor Way.
Yes. All right, now we're getting to the real core of the meat of our meeting tonight, which is update on the city's response to COVID-19, and 8.4, 8.5, and 8.6 will be financial discussions. So Dan, would you lead us off?
Yes, Madam Mayor. So item 8.4 is a standing update that we have on each agenda item now to just kind of keep the council and the community briefed on what the city is experiencing and doing as a business and a government entity in the COVID-19 situation. So I just wanted to give you a quick run through of some of the latest updates from the different departments. The most recent public health order lifted a lot of the restrictions on construction, as was alluded to earlier in the meeting. For Public Works, that has meant that we are revisiting some of the projects that we deemed as less essential or non-essential and had postponed, and we're starting to move those back onto track if they have a funding source dedicated to them. We continue to do our maintenance work. Hopefully you've noticed that our guys are out there practicing and modeling the social distancing and masks and other requirements that you'll see in the public health orders, and we will continue to do that for the foreseeable future. One of the other areas that we've been helping the police a lot with is the fact that we're still having visitors coming into some of our neighborhoods to park to get onto some of the trails, particularly at the end of Madrone Canyon. And so Public Works continues to support the police in trying to mark that this is residential only parking area and direct people to where it'd be more appropriate for them to consider parking so they're not impacting the neighborhood. And in general, a reminder that the health orders now emphasize that you should be using your local recreation that you can walk to. Mm-hmm. Big news on the parks front is that as part of the new health order, we did open the tennis courts. We had some anxious tennis players that were surprised they were still locked first thing in the morning on the first day of the new order. That's because we were working hard with the county to be clear what the signs specifically should say, and you'll see now we have signs posted reminding folks how they can use the tennis courts while conforming with the shelter and with the public health order. The library has continued with its virtual and online offerings, and we have a virtual book club that's working quite well. We also are going to try our first online gardening workshop, and you can RSVP to that at the ref desk at cityoflarkspur.org. You'll be hearing from me later tonight. We are making plans for how the library will operate when we are allowed to open or provide services in the library. And as part of that, Franklin Escobedo, the library director, has been working with the other library directors around the county to make sure there's a coordinated effort. One of the things we know folks are frustrated about is they have a lot of material on hold and they're wondering why they can't have their material. All the holds are frozen, all the material sitting wherever it was the day everything got closed. So we asked for some patience the first day we're allowed to operate because it will take a while to move all this material around the county to where it's supposed to go. I mentioned that the police are still struggling with increased bike and ped interaction on the trails and want to really encourage folks to be thoughtful about that. we've tried to focus some of our traffic patrol to get out on the trails and talk to folks and do some education. And the police chief actually asked me to specifically thank Public Works for all the support they've been providing, which has been really helpful. And then I just wanted to circle back to rec for a moment. The other probably big news folks are wondering about is what it means that now we can offer childcare and camps. We're trying to understand that ourselves, and we ask for a little patience. Sometimes I think folks in the community that I talk to don't realize that the city's not part of the inner circle of these public health orders. So we do tend to get a early warning that they're coming out and what they're going to say. But like all of you, we are trying to figure out exactly how to implement the changes as we go along. And we want to be very thoughtful and very cautious before we begin doing any form of camps and any sort of childcare. And I'll be touching on those topics as well when we get to our budget implications. With that, Madam Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Are there any questions of the city manager on the COVID-19 update from the city? Okay. Allison, is anybody in the audience raising their hand to ask a question about that COVID-19 updates that the city is doing?
There is no public comment.
Okay. All right, thank you. I know it's challenging to look at what the rules are because they change frequently, and we just can't pivot on a dime. When you have city staff and other things that you need to make sure people are continuing to be safe and social distance and masks, etc. So I appreciate that your staff is working hard at trying to implement them in a reasonable amount of time. Moving on to 8.5, the city financial update.
Yes, Madam Mayor and council members. So this is a standing item we've been placing on the agenda so we can just tell you about sort of the latest financial developments that are very specific to the time frame. So I'm not going to use this item to talk about a number of subjects that we'll review in our preliminary budget, but I did want to highlight a few key things that are happening in the financial area. First, I want to give acknowledgement and encourage folks to visit the Chamber of Commerce website. The Chamber of Commerce for Larkspur has launched a GoFundMe campaign that they hope to use to help some of the small business owners in town who have been impacted and could really use that help to make ends meet until they can reopen in whatever form that takes. Additionally, there are discussions going on with the county and all of the cities on monies that may be made available at the county level for more public-oriented support of businesses. And we're working out some of the details now. I've been getting a lot of support from council members who've been working on the business recovery issues. Particularly want to acknowledge Councilmember Paulson and Vice Mayor Haroff, who are your liaisons to the chamber, because they've taken a lot of that work and reached out to different entities and fed me that information. It's been very helpful. The other thing is I get a lot of questions now about, are we applying for this pot of money? Are we applying for that pot of money? I want to acknowledge the legislative committee for the Marin County Mayors and Council Members group, because they made sure to point out to our Congressman Huffman, that a lot of the federal pots of money are for local government, are restricted to local governments that have 500,000 or more people in population. So we would love to apply for a lot of the federal money that folks are hearing about. We're not eligible because of our size. We continue to join the voice that's in Sacramento. We join them virtually to ask that the state think about local government as they think about their recovery efforts. And the governor's aware of the impacts that local government are experiencing, and hopefully that awareness will translate into plans down the road. And it's understandable right now there's a heavy focus on the business recovery aspect of things. So we are looking at all these pots of money. I want to make the council aware of that, and we hope to move forward as these opportunities become available.
And to that point, Dan, I just wanted to point out to the other council members that Nancy Hall Bennett, our representative from the North Bay League of California Cities, sends out an excellent newsletter every day and links to all sorts of opportunities for us to go on to calls and other legislative points to weigh in on these matters ourselves. And the Marin Mayors and Council Members has been, a mayor's group has been trying to get a lot of this support to Jared Huffman to really look at supporting smaller cities. So I encourage you to get on Nancy Hall Bennett's email list so you can see those things. Are there questions on this item from the council? Were you done, Dan, on that thing? I'm sorry, I might have interrupted you.
I was, Madam Mayor.
Okay. And is there anyone in the public who has raised their hand to ask a question on item 8.5?
At this time, there is no public comment.
Okay. Thank you for this. And remember, we did create a financial or economic strategies ad hoc committee to help as these matters change constantly. So that brings us to 8.6, which is preliminary estimates and projections for the budget and service levels in fiscal year 2021.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So I am now going to do a PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to do a little quick screen sharing, and hopefully that will pop up for you shortly. Okay, is that visible?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Okay, so your Administrative Service Director, Kathy Orm, and I have been working to develop some preliminary estimates and projections for the budget. Tonight, we're going to really emphasize the higher level view of what we see going on and talk to you about the implications of the trends and the projections that we're aware of. We're not planning on getting into too much detail of our actual dollar amounts because we're still refining them. We're still working through some issues in terms of our staffing, in terms of our labor relations issues that may ultimately play out in the final dollar presentation. We do hope to bring you some preliminary dollar estimates in greater detail at your next meeting. And I do have some information for you this evening, but for the most part, we'll be talking in percentages and in the larger context in terms of money. What I wanted to do tonight was to focus heavily for the council and the community on the assumptions we're making about revenue for next year and the shortfall that we're anticipating and the trends that we're aware of in the local Marin economy that will impact that shortfall. Then I want to talk about how the different tools that are available to us can play out in terms of addressing the shortfall. You'll remember from our last meeting that our theme in addressing the shortfall is let's get to June 30. Our goal is going to be to get to June 30, 2021. And then we're expecting we'll still be feeling the financial impacts of this beyond this fiscal year. And so throughout our thinking about get to June 30, 2021, there will also be get to June 30, 2022. As I go through the talk, and this is what's, I think, poignant to some of the questions we heard this evening about how we envision operations, not everything we're proposing is entirely because of budget shortfalls, but also because we have to do business very differently in light of the COVID-19 situation, in light of the public health orders. Just like businesses are trying to figure out how they can be productive and do what they need to do under the public health orders, we have to figure that out as well. we have to figure it out operating in a building over 100 years old that does not lend itself to people being spaced very far apart. And in fact, when the day comes that the council wants to return to the council chamber, we may have to totally reconfigure it, because we were looking at the dais and realizing there's just no way we can have you sitting 6 feet apart at the dais. So I want to talk a little bit about service levels tonight and the implications of the changes we're going to make to adjust to the constraints of COVID-19. I know Councilmember Hilmer requested, and we will work on and bring to you later, sort of that tiered look at service levels, where we look at what the very bare bone basic level of service is, and what a medium or moderate level of services, and then what an enhanced level of service looks like. We're not including that in our exercise at this point, because we're so focused on trying to figure out what services will look like in light of the physical and operational constraints that we're facing. And then I wanted to emphasize, as we dive into this presentation, that the situation is fluid. There's a lot of, this is what we think is going to happen, but we might not be right. As I've talked to several people, this is not your normal economic downturn. There's a lot of variables that are not behaving the way we're accustomed to seeing when we look at a recession. And so I anticipate that we'll be doing quarterly, if not even more regularly, visits to our assumptions with you at the council level. And we may be adjusting the budget throughout the year as we observe what is actually really happening. But for now, the exercise of adopting a budget that gets us going on July 1, we are building the model based on the best information we have, and keeping consistent with our approach, which has always been to be very conservative, so that we're prepared to deal with the challenges that we might face. So that I would like to now move through the presentation. And Madam Mayor, I just warn you the way these systems work. I'm going to be looking at my slides. So if someone wants to interrupt me, please just go ahead and structure that and facilitate interrupting me if you have a question.
Okay. So why don't we do that? If we get to a question, well, if you have it during the course of the presentation, just sort of raise your hand and I can see you.
And I'll try to pause between slides briefly in case council members have questions. And then we can take questions from the public at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. So here are our key financial assumptions based on the best available information that we have. These come from a variety of sources. We are using information we've been receiving from the County of Marin. We've been using information that we've received from various entities that do sales tax review and analyses. We've been using the League of California Cities information to create for you some key assumptions about what we think is going to happen. Yes? Oh, sorry.
Is it just me or is he frozen?
Did I freeze? Who froze? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I think Catherine's got a problem, but she's back.
I'm back, but you froze, or everybody's frozen.
Am I back now? Allison, are you seeing this?
I am. I see, Dan, I think you are live.
Okay.
I think everyone is live right now.
Okay.
Okay,
great. Thank you. Okay.
I think Catherine is just having a problem.
Okay. Sorry, guys.
Okay. Right now, the county of Marin is projecting that state property tax will actually continue to grow. So we have incorporated that projection into our budget. The county of Marin, the assessor has a impressive track record of accuracy in projecting property tax. So we're going to, at this time, model a 4% increase, which is more modest than some of the increases we've been seeing in recent years, but is nonetheless an increase. And for reference, during the Great Recession, now 12 years ago, Marin in general just sort of experienced flat property tax growth. We're going to use that projection. For sales tax, we've dug into information we have available about performance within the sectors that are most significant to Larkspur in terms of sort of variance in our sales tax. And those areas are our restaurants, our gas stations, and our general consumer goods stores. And at this time, we're going to project that sales tax will be down 40% in the general fund. That's distinct from Measure B, which gets more of an enhancement from purchases online and the purchases of motor vehicles. So while we expect Measure B to also be down, it probably won't trend down as much as the general fund. What we're being told by various entities that look at tourism and hotel tax data is that we should expect transient occupancy tax to be down 60 to 80%. We know from talking to folks who are familiar with what's going on up at the Courtyard at Marriott that it is definitely very low in occupancy at the moment, and we think it'd be appropriate for the time being to assume the 80% level. Sorry, somebody just printed something in my house. Hang on a sec.
We're all dealing with distractions.
Okay. So
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Dan.
Is there a way to get a dollar reference to these so we can see 4%, 4.2% of what versus 40% of what?
Yeah, I can do that if we want to pause the meeting at some point. I'll need about 10 minutes to produce those as dollars. I'd prefer to wait until the next meeting to really dive into the specifics of dollar amounts and what these translate into, and just speak toward the aggregate. But if the council would like me to do that tonight, I'd need a recess of about 10 to 15 minutes.
Well, I think
I don't want you to have to do that. I was just trying to get an order of magnitude.
Well, sales tax in the budget last year was roughly 2.8 million off the top of my head. So 40% down would put us at 1.6 million, 1.7 million.
Well, you did introduce this topic as a higher level discussion, and we'll have later opportunities to drill down into very specific numbers. So if it's all right with you, Dan, yeah, we can save that.
I just wanted to, if property tax is the biggest of all of these, that matters to 4% of that versus 40% of something smaller. So I was just trying to get an idea of the relationship.
But the projection on the occupancy tax is absolutely consistent with what I've heard from the Marriott. They're slammed right now, so there's not really much that can be done about that.
Why don't you continue, Ben?
Okay, probably the most difficult area for us to model right now, and the area that probably if I put 100 people in a room who work in the planning and building field for municipalities is what activity is going to look like in that arena over the coming fiscal year. Right now, our building department, our building division is very busy because there were a number of permits in the pipeline before COVID started. And so we're cranking through those. And we don't yet know in Larkspur what our trend data will look like in that area. Planning was a little slower during the COVID, since the start of COVID, but again, we don't totally know what to expect there. Based on talking to folks about what a conservative estimate would be, for the time being, we are estimating that fees in these two areas will be down 60 to 80%. As I get through later parts of the presentation, this is probably the area of the budget where we can scale operations as we get more data and we see what people are really going to do. A big question for planning and building fee revenue is whether folks are going to have confidence in their own finances to spend money on their property. In a typical recession, we see a slowdown in these areas as confidence in spending money goes down. And we're getting a lot of mixed messages about whether folks will be slowing down in that area. So we prefer at this time to use this estimate of fees being down 60 to 80%. So I did do an aggregate number, which, because we're working through the aggregate now, and with this mix of assumptions, at your last meeting, I told you we were looking at a $3 million shortfall. Depending on how a couple of these categories play out as we get some numbers in from the county and the state, we now think the shortfall somewhere between 2.4 million and 2.8 million against the revenues that were budgeted in fiscal year 1920 adopted budget. And that takes into account an increase in property tax against those anticipated losses in the other revenues. So with that, I'm going to transition to what are we doing as we plan to address the revenue shortfall. And there's really three categories of tools that we're looking at. One is making use of our reserves. And I'll remind the council that we committed our catastrophic reserve to cover our shortfall in the current fiscal year, which we believe will be about $1 million. Our total general fund reserve is $4.4 million, of which 2.64 roughly is the amount committed to catastrophic events. So we're getting close to having depleted half of our catastrophic reserve. We do have the ability under your adopted policy to shift money from the general fund's capital reserve into the general fund reserve, so we can continue to keep that reserve sufficient to cover our any shortfalls that we don't predict and adjust for. But that's not a sustainable model over time. We just happen to be very fortunate that because of the bridge project and our need for cash flow, we've been building up our cash position, and as a result, we have a reasonable amount of reserves to draw upon at this time. Another tool that we have to look at is restructuring debt commitments. And just like you might want to refinance your debt to reduce your payments, that's something that we can look at as well. And we actually have a very unique opportunity I'm going to talk about shortly in that area. And then, of course, there's downsizing the organization, and that's something we initially touched on with you at your last meeting, and I want to bring you some specific ideas that we've developed to begin downsizing the city, both to address our financial challenge and the anticipated limitations of operating under public health orders that limit what we can do.
Are there, before you move on, are there questions on this matter at this point? Gabe, you had your hand up?
One thing I was wondering if you could clarify on the slide on tools. So when it comes to the tool of reserves, I guess we have and allows us to make shortfalls, but we also take some of our revenues and allocate them as reserves. So would lowering the reserve threshold be part of that tool or another tool?
Did you get?
I'm not. Yeah, I think I understood the overall question is, would we consider lowering our reserve threshold? That's always an option. I think at this point, I wouldn't recommend that we do that, primarily because one reason the council has insisted on a 25% reserve is to ensure there's sufficient cash on hand to deal with costs throughout the year. It certainly is an option that we could look at if we needed to. When cities find it necessary to drop their reserve levels below what they consider to be the most appropriate, there are ways to bridge those challenges in cash flow. The most common would be to take out a tax revenue anticipation note, which is a loan that you take within one fiscal year that lets you bridge those lean periods between the two large influxes of revenue from property taxes. But we're not there yet. I think we can continue to carefully manage our reserves to preserve our cash flow and protect our outlay for our capital projects. We can't lose sight of the fact that we're not done with the Bon Air Bridge, and it's really important that we continue to have enough cash on hand to front the costs for that bridge. If we were to, as we talked about at your last meeting, were we to try to slow down the bridge project, we potentially jeopardize some of our federal funding. So we don't want to do that. On this slide, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just in the slide before, the shortfalls were primarily like sales tax and property tax and transient tax and all that. Is there any need to look at the reimbursements from, Caltrans for Bon Air or for Cal Fire? If we have any out of city loans of fire services, I believe those would be reimbursements we get. And is there any anticipation or any modeling of how those reimbursements might decrease?
So there's no risk of reimbursements for the Bon Air Bridge being decreased. That money was given to the federal government to Caltrans as the administrator for the state. It's held in an account for us. So that's a commitment on that Caltrans can't move that money somewhere else. It's a restricted fund. In terms of the Cal Fire, I can't tell you whether Central Wind Fire will experience challenges with their reimbursement from Cal Fire. I do think you're going to see a lot of agencies rethinking their mutual aid policies in terms of what they will allow for leaving the area, and that may be as much a manpower constraint or a firefighter constraint in terms of making sure we have adequate coverage here. And so it may mitigate any concerns we might have that the state would be slow to repay us for any support to Cal Fire.
Thank you.
Okay, moving back along. So as I mentioned, we are currently using $1 million. I apologize. I think I'm having Madam Mayor, I think I'm going to need a 2-minute recess. I need to get this laptop some power.
Okay, so why don't we all take a bio break for a few minutes and then come back when the power is resurged to his laptop. Does that sound good?
Thank you, Madam. Sorry about that.
All right, we're all have to have patience.
Although that was a simple, I thought it was plugged in and it wasn't plugged in. Okay, so getting back to the reserve discussion, did I address everything that you want to ask? Okay. Councilmember Paulson, did I address all of your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. In the fiscal year 21 budget, we have a one-time option to help address the shortfall in our transient occupancy tax. That's our hotel tax. We can only really do this one time, but for a variety of reasons over the last 7.5 years, we've built up a sizable reserve in that fund. That fund is was created by policy by the council. It's not a legal, there's no restriction on the money in that fund beyond your policy direction. And your direction has always been that for every dollar that comes into the city in hotel tax, 10% or 10 cents of that dollar should go into the transient occupancy tax fund. And the council's intent in creating that fund was to use the money to do business promotion, business investment, or events that might help the business community. However, because we built up this sizable reserve, and in light of the fact that we're going to experience a loss of TOT that was never envisioned, my proposal is that you transfer $525,000 out of the reserve, the TOT reserve, into the general fund next year to offset the significant portion of the unrealized hotel tax. Doing so will leave roughly $75,000 in that reserve, which is approximately 1 year's spending in that fund in a normal year. So we expect to downsize some of our funding in the TOT fund to get us through during this lean period for hotel tax. And so $75,000 should be sufficient to cover a reserve for 2 years in that fund. This is just a one-time opportunity that we have, but I think it's a significant one that we'll need to do to bridge the gap in the 21 budget. Okay. So if there aren't any other questions about reserves, I'm going to move on to looking at debt.
So one question about the reserves on the TOT funds, because obviously that does provide some support to various entities like the chamber and others. Is that going to compromise our ability to continue to provide support to the Chamber of Commerce and to the Lark Theater and other entities that count on those monies?
So with respect to the chamber, we currently have a placeholder to provide them with $20,000 next year. In the current fiscal year, you've provided them $35,000. We can comfortably do the $20,000 while ensuring the sustainability of the fund. The Lark is a trickier discussion. In general, my recommendation would be to suspend the arts grant program that the Lark has generally been the beneficiary of. Additionally, I think we have to have a serious discussion with the Lark about whether or not they'll be able to run the particular functions that the council deemed worthy of that grant. Now that said, I know that the Lark has been in contact with you, the vice mayor, as the council, as the chamber liaison, and had some discussions about new ideas. And I think there may be some contribution that the city can make to some of those ideas out of the remaining money that would be in this fund.
Okay. We've talked about the chamber and what we're able to do with the chamber, and I think everyone's okay with that. The LARC is a little bit different. So whatever we can do to kind of reinforce their comfort that we're behind them, with some of their innovative suggestions about what they can do, for example, during the summer, we ought to try to do, but they need to know everyone's being realistic here. So.
Well, I do think it's important, Vice Mayor Harf, to reiterate that the city doesn't have a direct relationship with the LARC. You have a grant program that supports art, and the LARC's been the entity that has repeatedly benefited from that grant program.
Right. I understand that. But they do have, they've created certain self expectations about going forward in the future, and I think they're making a really important effort to contribute to, the livelihood and the well-being of our community as we go through these next few months. So I want to be realistic about what we can commit to them, but to the extent that we can support them, even in modest ways, we should.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, I'll move on to discussing debt structure.
Okay.
So one of the things, as I mentioned, that we can look at to lower our expenses is to look at if there's ways to reduce the amount of money that the general fund is paying toward debt every year. At the moment, there's really two dominant debt payments that the general fund is making, two significant debt payments. The largest is the pension debt. And so this is the amortized over 20 years payment structure that was created by CalPERS for Larkspur and all the other entities within CalPERS that have unfunded liability, for us to pay that unfunded liability off. In the current budget, we're paying roughly $1.1 million toward that, toward the totality of our pension costs in terms of this amortized schedule that they created. The council last October approved moving forward with pension obligation bonds to capture a much lower interest rate than the rate that we're being charged by CalPERS. CalPERS right now is moving toward charging essentially a 7% rate because that's their expectation of return. And in the market right now, pension obligation bonds are capturing rates hovering between 3 and 3.5%. So the council had us move forward with that. So this is a unique situation where we're moving forward with a debt restructure at exactly the time when we have concerns about how to make our debt payments in general. And so I want to talk about that a little more. But before I do, I want to note we have one other substantial payment. We pay about $350,000 a year toward our corporation yard loan that we took out a few years ago to build the current corporation yard. But there's not really an opportunity to restructure those payments, and we're on the downslope on that debt. It retires, I believe, in, I'll have to check with Kathy, but I believe it's 2027. And so that was a 14-year loan that we took out in 2013. So I've crossed that one off the list. I think the debt's too unlikely to really help us in terms of the cost to refinance it. So I think we're going to focus instead on the opportunity with the pension debt. As I mentioned, the city was already in the process of restructuring our debt, our pension debt, using the pension obligation bonds. So we talked with our municipal advisor, Wolf Hansen, and talked about the option of obtaining the pension obligation bonds in a way where we would only have to pay interest for a year or two. When we commissioned underwriters for this process, we had them essentially pursue deals that would limit our payments in the first 2 years just to interest. Now, when we did that, we did tell the underwriters that we had some caveats. One was we wanted the overall savings that we were realizing across the life of the debt to stay roughly the same. We were estimating that we would save between $8 and $9 million over the life of the debt if we switched from paying CalPERS directly to paying pension obligation bonds. And we wanted that to remain the case, even if we restructured to only make interest-only payments in the first 2 years. The second opportunity or second thing that interested us quite a bit was that someday we will fully recover economically, and we will be back to the robust state that we were enjoying up until COVID hit. And so when that day came, when it comes, we want to make sure that we have the ability to make additional payments against this debt if we so choose. And that way we could accelerate payments to further bring down our interest costs. And I'm pleased to say that the underwriters were able to achieve those two goals. And so as a result, in the next fiscal year, we will make an interest-only payment against pension obligation bonds rather than a $1.1 million payment to CalPERS. The interest-only payment in fiscal year 21 is around $350,000. So we're saving roughly $750,000 in expense by taking advantage of this situation. And unlike someone who might be carrying a debt that they might restructure in order to save money and then have to pay the cost for that deal to take place, we were already paying the cost of this deal to switch from a debt with CalPERS to pension obligation bonds. So we did not incur any additional costs to create this structure that includes these interest-only payments in the first 2 years. So really appreciative of the work that was done by our financial team to make that happen. And I think it's actually, I said 750,000, it's probably closer to 700 when you round off everything.
No, those guys have done a great job, so appreciate it.
Okay, unless there are any other questions about the debt, I want to move on to downsizing the organization.
Yeah, just two quick questions. One was to clarify what you said earlier about returning to robust times. So that would be the fact that the bond is callable, right? Or is it that you can make accelerated payments? Or I'm wondering what term that alludes to.
I'd have to pull the details out. I don't remember off the top of my head at which year we can start to make additional payments. But at some point in the earlier part of the amortization schedule, we can begin to pay up to $500,000 additional payment against the bonds, and we can pay up to $2.25 million, I believe, total in accelerated payments that way to try to retire the bonds early. And I'm happy in a future presentation to bring more detail about that if you'd like. We will be bringing a summary of the issuance of the bonds when the deal is completed, which will be later this month.
Thank you. And the timing of
this. But the bottom line, Dan, is that this is a much better deal than what we have with our existing relationship with CalPERS. So absolutely. This is I'm wholly behind this.
And just to remind the public and our other council members is that we voted last month to have a Finance Ad Hoc Committee of the mayor and the vice mayor, and with an additional support of one of our emeritus council members, Larry Chu. And this was all presented to this group. And I appreciate, Dan, that you got right onto this as one of the tools in the toolbox, like you like to say, right away, so that we were able to jump on this refinancing before other cities and other entities might have gotten in line.
And thank you, Catherine, for the shout out to Larry, because Larry has always been a guiding light in these issues.
So let's keep going to your next slide.
Yeah, so unfortunately, as much as we would like to limit the way we address our shortfall with just reserves and one-time or 2-year adjustments to our expenses and our various funds, it's just not possible. We do need to look at our cost of doing business and try to reduce our payroll, which is our main expense. And so before I get into the specifics of how I envision that we will reduce payroll costs, I want to share the assumptions we have about the operational constraints that we're going to experience due to public health orders. And I think these constraints will speak to, and then the discussion of how we're going to operate will speak to questions we received, including the one speaker who sent in an email about how we envision reopening the library, which is something that I know a lot of folks are interested in. And as I've stated other times, just like for business, public health orders are something of a fluid situation. They're a fluid situation for the city. So we will adjust our business practices based on the public health orders. But I do think that what you're going to see here reflects restrictions that we anticipate to be in place for quite a while. So the first assumption is that for the foreseeable future, the childcare and summer camp limitations of 12 participants who are grouped with the same adult managing the program each day, we expect that that will be in place for quite a while. And so any programming that we can do has to be limited to those restrictions. Additionally, the programming space must allow for social distancing. So that second part is particularly difficult for the city, given most of our programmable space is very small. And so we're not sure at this time, and we don't feel confident at this time, that we can offer a lot of indoor programming. The one exception we probably have is the Hall Middle School gym. The outdoors offer us more opportunity, but again, there's going to be some limitations there as well. Oops, sorry. As I said, the current city spaces are not as conducive to hosting the programming. We may be able to use the gym. We're looking at outdoor opportunities. Right now, we're seeking some clarification on the public health orders. And one of the concerns we have at this very minute, because I've already had folks asking, can we launch some camps, get the kids out there, get them out of the house, is that we don't necessarily want to allow programming that's going to confuse the public that the park is now open and it's okay to come out and play a game of soccer or basketball together. So we have to be really thoughtful about what that outdoor programming looks like, what the signage would look like, what the controls would be, and what the messaging to the whole community would be about that programming.
Kevin, did you drop off, or I don't see you here anymore?
Oh, no.
Just your camera's off? Okay.
The camera's off. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
So as I mentioned,
I'm not on the camera right now, so I don't know why. Facilitating social distancing, very tricky in our three primary
environments: City Hall, the library, and recreation. So for this foreseeable future, we envision that city services will be online or virtual whenever possible. This includes access to the second floor, which houses planning and building, as well as a portion of the admin staff, specifically as it relates to public services, the city clerks on the second floor. If you visit our second floor and see our small lobby space, you'll realize why we have to be thoughtful about how we allow access to the second floor. So right now, the staff is reviewing software that would allow us to schedule appointments and use notifications, be it texting, email, whatever the person wants, to let them know it's time for their appointment, and they can come on up. And we need to do that in a way where we're even being thoughtful about limiting the exposure people have to each other as they pass one another in our city facilities, because even our stairwell is not particularly conducive to social distancing. We're still discussing what modifications we'll be making to our physical space on the second floor. I do think you can envision that we'll be putting some sort of acrylic or plexiglass barrier up, much like you're seeing in a lot of other customer service situations. Now, for the library. For the foreseeable future for the library, we're going to place an emphasis when we open on circulation of material. So we're strongly going to encourage folks to request their material online. And then we're going to be doing curbside pickups. And we're also going to create a hold room with a self-checkout machine. That's likely going to be where the children's library is currently housed. That way we can keep that situation relatively controlled and safe for the patrons and for the staff. At this time, at least as we open, our intention is to allow browsing of the library collection by appointment only, and we will not be offering a reading room. If you've been to our reading room, people would be sitting very close to one another, not capable of really offering social distancing in that space. And then for browsing, given our staffing challenges that we anticipate in the library, combined with the constraints of the space, we think it's most appropriate to limit how many patrons are in the library at any one time. The director, Franklin Escobedo, and I are still sort of working through what that appointment system looks like, and is it one person for 15 minutes? Is it two? We'll work our way through that. And the rules on day one, we'll be very cautious as we kind of get our feet under us in terms of running the library in the new environment, and as we gain experience and understanding of how we can control the environment, we'll adjust. And we'll also continue to adjust as the public health orders change. But that said, we will have staffing constraints that also are driving some of our decisions on what we can and can't do. We do expect hours for the library to be considerably less than what folks are accustomed to. We'll probably be open fewer days, and the length of time that we're open will be shortened quite a bit. Now, I do want to make sure folks who are hearing this let them know that the library staff has gotten adept in the last several months at providing service online. And if you haven't taken advantage of it, they're doing reference services by email and by phone right now, and have served quite a few patrons that way. So we will continue to do that type of service as well to complement what we're going to be offering here. And I understand that earlier today, Franklin had some discussions with the Friends of the Library who have, they're working out some details on how they can support our curbside ideas. Okay. Recreation. given the constraints that I described and our concerns on how we can safely manage our recreation offerings, we're going to focus almost exclusively on the rental of our facilities to independent programming providers. We won't be doing much, if anything, using our own resources in-house. That's not a massive shift from where we are now. A lot of what we do in recreation is essentially facilitating the use of our properties and the property of the school district that we manage, and making them available to different types of vendors and groups. So we'll just continue to do that in the foreseeable future. One of the things I'm not sure when and how it might come back someday before COVID and COVID restrictions are gone is the summer school program. We would definitely not be offering that this year. It's already been announced that we'd be canceling it. But our recreation offerings will probably be very limited over the next year. And we are in discussions with our neighbors to make sure that if they're able to offer programming and there's any way to coordinate and work together, we do that. And then the child care center's business model needs to be reevaluated. Our first cut is, at best, we might be able to serve 36 children throughout the entire course of a day in the child care center. And that's not a confirmed number. We're actually trying to get clarity between what our local public health officials saying and what the state licensing group is saying about the child care center. So we typically run double, if not more, children through there. And so we're going to have to really rethink how we do business and what we would charge if we're going to operate the child care center moving forward. As a caveat or a note here, the child care center does not exist within the general fund. It's its own fund, and the council requires it to be cost neutral. So that's one of the other reasons we'll have to look hard at the business model is we'll probably have to rethink how we charge people for those services if it's going to be cost neutral.
So can we pause and see if there's any questions on what we've gone up to till now? Nope. Okay. Keep going.
Okay. So recognizing those constraints that I've laid out for you in terms of the operational impact of COVID-19, we now need to consider those constraints in conjunction with the financial shortfall that we discussed earlier, knowing that we can't find all of our financial shortfall with the other resources that we laid out there. Plus, we have to keep in mind that we're trying to set up our staffing so that it's sustainable to get us not only through fiscal year 21, but also through fiscal year 22. So as we're thoughtful about that, we're in discussions with our represented employee association about various ideas. Some of these we'll be moving forward with and can provide some detail now. Some of them we'll describe more generally as we work out some final details with the employee association. Our preliminary budget thoughts include the following. First is that the library and recreation will be combined into one department, a community services department. By doing that, we'll restructure the department so that we eliminate 2 recreation positions. We'll be eliminating the recreation director position, and we'll be eliminating the administrative assistant position. The assistant will actually be reassigned. The administrative assistant currently works 20 hours for recreation and 20 hours for administration. We're going to move that position entirely into administration and deploy it a little differently so that we continue to have that employee with us. At your last meeting, at your special meeting recently, the council authorized an early retirement incentive program. I had discussions with the incumbent recreation director, Dick Whitley, about different options that might be available to him with that position being eliminated. And he informed me it's his intention to opt to take advantage of the retirement program. So that vacancy will be created through that attrition. And I said eliminate here. I should actually say we're going to show the recreation director as an existing position in our system, but not fill it or fund it. So if down the road, this community service department is not ideal for us and we want to restore our different services to two separate departments, we'll keep all the documentation in place so that that can happen rather easily. Within the library, we have one filled library position that we're expecting to cut from the budget. It's possible that employee will also be taking advantage of the retirement program. We're not certain yet. We're also looking at planning and building downsizing by one position. That position is something that the director, Neil Toth, and I are looking at different options so that we can bring in our final budget exactly how that will look. And we probably will be looking at some form of solution that creates a little more cross-training between these two divisions so that we can take the remaining people power and deploy it as best we can to keep these functions operating. As I mentioned, planning and building is probably the most scalable of our operations. And so if it proves as we go along that demand returns for the service levels that we were providing before COVID-19, then we'll be able to quickly work to restore planning and building operations to what they were at that time.
And Dan, just a question. Will these become effective July 1st, these downsize preliminary budget of this reduction in services and retirements? Is that by the fiscal year July 1st?
It's generally by July 1st. The council gave me latitude to work with each individual employee who's considering retirement to see how well we can align our financial goals with the employee's retirement goals. So that means that there may be some employees that after they talk to CalPERS come to me and say, if I could be allowed to work through July, it's advantageous to my retirement position in a way that is acceptable to the city. So we might do that on a case-by-case basis, but generally we expect all of these changes to be effective July 1.
All right, thank you.
So here's what is also in the budget. You heard the mayor make reference to the importance of maintaining public safety through our financial crisis. My presentation is focused on the city, and today the public safety is handled through joint powers authorities that we belong to, and I'll talk about what they're doing a little later. But there is another significant element to first response, and that's the maintenance division of public works. When we have a flood, it's the maintenance workers that are out clearing the storm drains. They're out lowering the levels in the Larkspur Marina. They're out clearing tree debris. When there's fire and smoke, they're the ones adjusting the timing of lights. They're the ones putting out the barricade signs. And we currently have one vacancy in that unit. And I consulted at length with the director, Julian Skinner, as well as the superintendent for the maintenance division. And we are of the strong opinion that we need our full 6-man crew to fulfill those first response duties. So it is the one vacancy that I'm proposing to fund in the next fiscal year budget. There are 3 vacancies that were defined and not filled in the current budget. 2 are librarian positions, and 1 is in public works. It's an inspector who goes out and inspects permit activity as well as project activity. We're proposing that these positions continue to be listed in the budget, but they won't be funded next year. As you can imagine, that will significantly hinder the library's ability to perform, but given the restrictions of COVID-19, we think we can align these the limited staff we'll have with the limited operation we think we can offer for a while in the library. That would be another area that when funding starts to come back, we'd want to look at whether the restrictions of the public health orders allow us to bring services back and what the staffing levels need to be to do that. Not shown here, but I wanted to make note, Kathy Orm reminded me that we had a placeholder in the current fiscal year budget to hire somebody for information technology services and bring some of that in-house. We never acted on that placeholder and never created a formal position in the budget. And instead, we decided to stick with an outsource model. And so we think that'll actually prove more cost efficient over time. And so that placeholder will be transferred from the administration staffing budget into the administration IT budget for the contract services. As I mentioned, we're in discussion with our employee association, our represented employees, and we are discussing with them the possibility and the need, actually, it's not the possibility, it's the need to do furloughs to reduce our costs on a short-term or limited-term basis. And the way we're working on furloughs and discussing it with them, we would actually reduce the number of hours that our represented employees are working in order to realize some cost savings, but that has implications for services. We are looking at reducing employees' hours worked by roughly 10%, and for a 40-hour employee, that means 208 hours less productivity across the fiscal year. So when you multiply that across a small employee base, that's a significant savings, but it's also a significant impact to service levels, and we'll need to work through what that looks like should that materialize. We are talking about with the employees about how that would actually be structured and what would be triggers to lift the furloughs, which are understandable concerns they have that we want to work out with them. So to sum what I'm describing, our current assumption is that our workforce will be reduced by 6 positions. That may not sound like a lot to folks, but that's roughly 1/6 of our workforce. And so that is pretty significant for us. And then we do expect remaining employees might be working as much as 1 less day per pay period. Our pay period is a 2-week pay period. So what that looks like ultimately for operations is what we're discussing now. Those preliminary implications, it's quite likely we will make the work week Monday through Thursday and have limited to no staffing on Fridays. And as I mentioned, the library will likely have significantly reduced hours of operation. The director and I are discussing what that should be, recognizing that we do have a significant number of patrons of the library that commute, and for them to take advantage of the library, it's important that we can offer evening and Saturday hours for them to pick up materials or schedule an opportunity to browse in the library. Not referenced here, but something that we've also been talking about is we see folks coming to City Hall even today and sitting out on our stoop and sitting on the bench by the side of the building to use the Wi-Fi. So we're trying to figure out, when weather permits, if we can put chairs out and around City Hall at appropriately distanced spacing so that folks can sit and take advantage of the Wi-Fi. What we don't anticipate facilitating is that under normal operating conditions, we have folks who operate their businesses out of our library, taking advantage of our Wi-Fi. We have folks that come in to work on different types of research projects. We don't anticipate that we'll be able to provide them a space that's really comfortable for doing that outside. But even on the day that I was walking the perimeter with Franklin, I guess it was Monday, one of the patrons overheard us and said, "You got to keep the Wi-Fi on." So we will do that, and we'll figure out a way to make it as accessible as possible to folks. Preliminary implications, as I said, we'll scale operations to demand in planning and building. So right now we're looking at scaling down. Here's one that is subtle but significant for us. 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, we took code enforcement and hired a company that specializes in that service. So these are when we have folks that are violating permits with their activity, or they may be doing some sort of code violation related to nuisance portions of our municipal code. That's been a very successful thing for us. Having a third party do code enforcement not only lifted the burden from staff in terms of time that it requires to do code enforcement, but it also brought in folks who that's what they do, and they have the mentality to do it. And it's not that our folks can't do code enforcement, but we're going to be asking them to do code enforcement again, recognizing that it takes them away from other core assignments that they have. So we'll be doing a balancing act. That, though, will produce a significant cost savings to us. So even though the service level will be diminished, it'll be a helpful cost saving. One of the things we want to talk about with you, this is more of a work in progress that won't be effective on July 1, but we want to reevaluate our heritage activities, and in particular with respect to the legal aspects of heritage activities. We want to look at whether it makes sense to move into the Planning Commission to reduce our staffing load in terms of serving a specialized board. That would probably also involve talking to our heritage community about forming a true historical society and having them take on more of that preservation of knowledge and preservation of memory as a society rather than a city function. Public Works is currently working through the capital improvement program to figure out what projects can be postponed because they are general fund projects and we want to reduce the drain on the general fund. Our big projects, our big two, the bridge and the Measure B road program, will continue. They do not hurt the general fund. Where we probably have to think carefully is some of the smaller park projects that we do and whether those need to be pushed out a year or two before we can address them. One of the things that we are researching now is that we get an annual allocation of the county-wide Measure A sales tax that we use to fund improvements to our parks. And it is allowable in that program to direct those monies toward the maintenance of parks. And so I've long advocated with the council, and the council has been in agreement with me that measuring money has been a windfall that has allowed us to do park improvements that we never would have been able to do. And I'd like that activity to continue, but I think during this downturn, during this shortfall, directing that money into the maintenance division so that we can be sure we continue to maintain our parks at an appropriate level is a better investment for us. So we're researching that so we can bring that to you. Also,
Dan, before you go to the next slide, could I just go back to the code enforcement bullet point?
Sure.
That would have seemed to me to have been a cost-saving measure when we started to bring it, aside from just efficiency and other considerations. So is that just basically meaning we're just going to cut down on code enforcement?
The amount of code enforcement we were doing when we used to do it in-house was considerably less aggressive and attentive than when we had an outside resource. And it's not to say we don't do code enforcement when it's in-house, but we prioritize health and safety over beautification and nuisance, if you will. A lot of what we've been able to accomplish with our third party is spotting areas that are prone to graffiti and going out and talking with the property owner about changes they might make to discourage that behavior.
Okay.
We probably won't be able to do that sort of activity, and we'll be much more focused just on code compliance.
Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like what we were doing with the third party was more at the margin anyway. So we were doing everything with the third party, but right. But the additional benefit was in that regard, and so that's helpful for me to understand, because it would have otherwise seemed like a cost-effective way of dealing with that issue.
Well, what I would say, Vice Mayor Harf, is that if we start to see planning activity return to something resembling the pre-COVID-19 event, then I would probably be talking with Director Toft about restoring code enforcement through a third party so that we free up our in-house staff to focus on current planning activities. And so that would be the trigger for that reconsideration. If we experience slower times in planning, then it makes sense to direct some of this code enforcement activity over to the staff.
Okay. All right. That's helpful to understand.
Are you getting near the end of your presentation?
I am.
Okay.
Last bullet on this slide is that as a general practice in Larkspur that predates me, we've tried to really be gentle in terms of our cost recovery against projects. And by that, I mean charging our staff hourly rate and overhead charges to our projects. And we actually have in our fee schedule that you commissioned a few years ago a rate to charge against two projects that is closer to a true cost recovery rate. When the general fund was doing really well, we had tried to do that as on a lesser scale so that we could potentially realize savings that could be transferred later on into a future project. And ultimately, we'd like to get back to that someday, but in the interim, or at least for the foreseeable future, we want to really improve our cost recovery so we can offset the cost of our engineering division even more and charge that into the projects. I don't anticipate that will produce any significant changes to our project load at this time, and we'll keep monitoring what that means long term. What it does mean in the short term is it allows us to continue to keep a rather robust engineering division that is handling at the moment upwards of $40 million and actually, sorry, count the whole road program over 5 years and the bridge program, then you're really looking at more like 60 million in projects. So it's been an important investment on our part, and we just want to make sure that we're cost recovering there as much as possible so that general fund's not taking too heavy of a load. I did want to mention outside agencies and entities because they are also important to our budget. Our two public safety JPAs were charged by the member agencies to figure out internal restructuring cost savings that would keep the charge to the member agencies flat, meaning whatever we were charged in the current fiscal year is what will be charged in the next fiscal year. That's no small feat because the two public safety JPAs have contractual obligations that will increase their costs. So the chiefs of each agency worked with the management committees and the respective finance officers of those JPAs, and they've come up with some creative ways to move different pots of money and costs around and potentially accelerate some attrition. And those things in total will allow Larkspur's costs for public safety to be the same in fiscal year 21 as they were in fiscal year 20. Another significant joint powers authority we belong to is Bay City's Joint Powers Insurance Authority. This is actually how we deal with risk for the city and risk management. And for all intents and purposes, the public might think of this as our insurance broker or our insurance agent. And a lot of the way that Bay City calculates costs in terms of risk relates to payroll. And they have agreed to accept modified payrolls for the next fiscal year. And that's significant because we typically turn in projected payrolls in January and February. So you can imagine all the member agencies turned in anticipated payrolls pre-COVID-19. And rather than true up the cost next June, they've agreed to allow us to modify those payrolls now so that we can bring our costs there down significantly. We've joined the other cities in Marin County asking all our JPAs to revisit their costs to figure out how they can control those costs and their activities over the next 2 years. And then we are looking at whether we can reduce contributions to entities like the Chamber of Commerce that we referenced earlier. There's a lot of small amounts going out of the city that we'll need to go through with the council during the budget hearing, kind of line item by line item, and talk about whether it's appropriate to freeze that particular cost for a year or two to get us through this period, because all those small amounts start to add up and you have to give them their due consideration. A few more slides across. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just back on the Bay Cities, is that primarily employment practices liability that is the cost driver there, and where payroll changes will reduce costs?
A lot of our general liability as well, because a lot of our general liability is tied to the activity that we conduct, and there's not a really great way to sort of figure out the risk model. So they do a combination of payroll, experience factors, and then they go out and purchase supplemental insurance products, and so those also play a role. And just as an aside, the insurance industry doesn't like California a whole heck of a lot anymore, and I know you all know that because you all have experienced it with your fire insurance. It trickles to government too. We're not real popular with the national insurance brokers, and we're seeing our premiums go up in a lot of areas. And that I can't bring down.
No.
And just it's Kevin, just a quick thing on other JPAs. Obviously, one of my investments is in MCE, but we don't really contribute to them, correct?
We don't contribute to them. The council, when it went to deep green, did tell the staff that we should be annually reviewing the difference between the different levels of green product. And so given the current fiscal situation, it would be appropriate to at least look at the delta between the different levels of service to the city. But that's not a true JPA cost. That's our cost of buying electricity.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's fine. And what you just said was fine, although I think once you dig into that, you'll find that the differential is trivial. So. And
I only view my responsibility as to report it to you, and then we'll discuss it in context.
I asked that question mostly just for the benefit of others who aren't necessarily as familiar with the background on that particular organization.
You know, there's a lot of things we do collectively. We do animal control collectively. We do street lights collectively. And there's a lot of captured economies of scale and savings. So we may not actually accomplish a whole lot by downsizing some of these JPAs because their costs are very modest and their return in terms of captured economies of scale are very high. So I'm not sure that we'll see a lot of dollars there in general.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that clarified because that's a big JPA. So.
Yeah. Where are we going to continue to invest? Because there are some things we've been doing that need to continue. The first and foremost is technology. We've been putting laptops in the hands of our employees and replacing our desktops with laptops. And that was supposed to happen over several years. And because of COVID, we put the pedal to the metal and have been buying laptops as quickly as we can get them because they are tough to get the kind of laptop we're trying to get to run all of our software. But I think every employee we've handed a laptop to has come back within a couple of weeks and said we should have done this a long time ago. And they're coming up with new and creative ways to serve the public in the future, given the mobility that a laptop provides. And I think being able to now go home with a machine that's capable of running everything we do in the office is opening our employees' eyes to how to transition our touch point electronically onto the internet. And I think you're going to see us make huge advances there. And so we will continue to make those investments, and we'll continue to invest in the software packages that will let us capture efficiencies through better service. So the most significant of that is we've been looking at overhauling our software that runs our planning and building department. And we will continue with that process because long-term, the return is too high to the city to stop that midstream. We were in the middle of doing a recruitment and retention review process, and we were making various adjustments. While we are talking to the employees about an across-the-board temporary adjustment in the form of a furlough or some other pay deferral, we are continuing to just look at our overall place in the market and continue to look at how we're positioning ourselves, because one of the problems that sometimes occurs when cities downsize and make cuts is that they're not well positioned to be competitive when the economy starts to come back. So we want to make sure that we're still thoughtful in that regard. And so we'll probably still be bringing you changes in compensation that we think make sense, keeping in mind the overall context of the economy and the fact that we are currently asking all of our employees to consider taking and making a sacrifice next year. And then lastly, I want to assure the council and the public that the Measure B Fund remains sustainable. Measure B has outperformed our projections by a rather substantial amount. And I had every intention this year of having a long conversation with the Measure B Oversight Committee and then with the council about what an appropriate reserve level was for the Measure B fund, so that we could then talk about what to do with the sheer amount of revenue we've enjoyed in that account. Well, obviously COVID-19 hit, and the answer there is we're holding on to it to make sure we can keep making the debt payments against the roads. We have already collected, or we will have collected by the end of this fiscal year, enough money to make our debt payments for this fiscal year and enough money to make our debt payments for next fiscal year.
Okay.
So even if we didn't collect $1 in Measure B revenue in fiscal year 21, we'd be able to make our debt payments. And we're projecting revenue in Measure B to be strong enough in fiscal year 21 to fund a reserve that's at least 1 year's debt payment. So that means we can go into fiscal year 22 with confidence that the Measure B program remains sound.
It's nice to be part of a city with a conservative fiscal policy.
Yeah.
Almost the end. So what if revenues are healthier? I have a lot of folks who keep telling me I'm the Debbie Downer of the Marin managers when it comes to financial outlook. And you
really did. You dated yourself with that. Sure.
Yeah, I did. But I want to be the pessimist that's wrong. I don't want to be the optimist that's wrong.
Well,
but you, the community, and the employees all deserve a commitment that we're not going to make all these decisions and put a budget in place in July 1 and then just sit on our thumbs till June 30. So I anticipate the level of review that we'll be bringing to you at the council level will be much higher than normal. It'll be at a minimum that will be coming to you quarterly, and we'll be saying, did we get it right? Are the trends the way we thought they would be? And if they're looking better than what we thought, do they look good enough to go back and start to expand what we're doing? Do they look appropriate that we can start to fund positions and start to operate closer to what we were pre-COVID-19? And so that's something that I'm committing to will happen, and it may even be more frequently than quarterly as it's necessary. And then we will scale upward by restoring work hours and adding staff if it's appropriate. Now, because I'm the Debbie Downer, I keep reading about this second surge. So I do think that it's going to be a good 6 months before we even have any sense of what trends really look like in fiscal year 21. And even then, we'll probably have to approach them with a little bit of caution. But because we're in this for the long haul and we need to be thinking beyond just fiscal year 21, but into the subsequent years, we're going to want to constantly be monitoring our assumptions and seeing if we were off, and if we were off, making changes. And you'll note, as much as I'm a pessimist, I'm optimistic that I was wrong in the correct direction, if that makes any sense. And so I'm framing all of these slides that we would be scaling upward, not downward. A lot of folks ask me, why are you being so conservative? And it's because I'd much rather be scaling upward. That's a much better direction to be going.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We still have 24 minutes till curfew, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, we have curfew at 10:30. Well, I know we're doing high level today, so I hope in the next couple of meetings we can drill down, like you said, into that discussion. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the council for any questions they have, just realizing that we do have 2 or 3 more meetings in which we're going to really look at the specifics. But does anything jump out at you right now that you want clarification for? And I would also encourage you to, you can also drill down a little bit more into some of these things in personal one-on-one meetings too. But go ahead, is anybody interested in an overall question?
Can you hear me at all?
Yes, we can. Hi, Scott, go ahead.
Dan, I just want to say thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. I'm not big on thank yous, but I really appreciate that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
That's all.
Anyone else at this point?
Here.
Here, I'd like to echo that too, because this is, as we say, a moving target, and you really have to look at a lot of different variables that are inconclusive. So appreciate this. I think as we strategize in to the next few meetings, maybe bumping this up a little earlier in our agenda item will allow more people to participate. So, but at this point, I'd like to see, I see we have 18 attendees. Is there anyone in the audience, Allison, who would like to make a comment?
Thank you. I'm looking for any raised hands at this moment, and there are none. And no public comment has come in through email.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. So I'll bring it back to the council for any further discussion at this time. Everybody just, we're a little kind of like shell shocked. So
no, I'm not shell shocked. This is all what we should have been anticipating now for some time. Yeah. So I just want to express again my personal appreciation for what Dan is doing, because this is tough stuff. And any help that any one of us can provide to personally manage things during this time, you know, I know we're all ready and willing to help.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Mayor, I just also, if I could, want to acknowledge the hard work happening across the whole staff to think these things through. They've all done a remarkable job. It's fresh in my mind walking the library with Franklin Escobedo, and to ask a person whose entire life's been invested to the passion of libraries to contemplate operating such a limited, unusual library situation for a year or more, for him to embrace that and help me figure out a way that we can offer some level of service is really a remarkable thing. But all of our staff have stepped up at every level to offer us suggestions on how we can deal with this situation and address our costs.
And I think it's important that they know, the staff knows that we as a council have always been very supportive of our staff and recognize their professionalism, and hope and continue to do that in this crisis time for them, because we're all going through, we recognize that they're all going through family and professional and personal changes too that they have to cope with. So just let them know, and I'd be happy to mention that also to any staff I see. Well, seeing nothing else, we're reaching the end of our agenda. So our next meeting is scheduled for May 20th, unless we need to meet in any emergent need. So I'd like to close tonight's meeting with just a personal recognition of a long-term resident who passed away this week, Beth Ashley. I don't know if any of you read the Marin IJ on the other day, but Beth Ashley, who was a 60-year resident of Greenbrae, was considered the grand dame of journalism for Marin County. And she lived in Greenbrae since 1959, raising 5 sons there through 2 marriages while she worked at the Marin Independent Journal for over 60 years. It looks like she wrote over 1,200 columns for the newspaper. She moved here with her family from Cambridge to Belvedere when she was just a child, because her father was brought in to assist in running a shipyard in Marin County. She went to Tam High and then to Stanford. So she was a long-time resident of our community, and really a jewel of a writer, and one who published several books about her life and experiences living in our small community of Marin, and her experiences of being a resident of our community. So just want to say heartfelt wishes to her family, and we appreciated that she was part of the Greenbrae community for all those years.
Thank you, Catherine. That's very nice.
Yeah. So good night, everybody, and we will see each other around. Wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, and wash your hands. And hopefully things are going to be looking better by the end of the month. Oh, one last thing. It's National Nurses Day, and you know I'm a nurse, so say hello to all of those healthcare workers who are working on the front line, helping to take care of our community. So
You bet.
shout out to them.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.